Hey guys, welcome to Fanfic Fanatics. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku became Lord Drakkon and fell for Melissa? Part 2, Final. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is La Resurrección del Dragon by Vulkyrus_Prime. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. The world shook as the two titans collided in the newly formed arena. The force of their blows sending shockwaves across the ocean. The sky darkened, winds swirled, and the water around the fighting island rose like a raging tide. All for One was the first to move, his body radiating the power of multiple quirks simultaneously. His muscles increased in size thanks to his muscular quirk, his speed multiplied with a variant of hyperacceleration, and his fists were enveloped in devastating black energy with the power of his compressed burst quirk. With impossible speed, he slid across the sand and launched a direct blow at Lord Drakkon's chest, the earth beneath them splitting into a crater a kilometer in diameter. The force of the impact would have shattered any normal human being. Before the blow could complete its impact, Drakkon's helmet glowed with the morphin grid, and with a single sweep of his arm he deflected the attack, absorbing the energy as if it were a simple training blow. All for One was shocked. Interesting. But Drakkon didn't give him time to react. With a quick turn, Lord Drakkon slammed his reinforced elbow into the Demon King's jaw, sending him flying across the arena at supersonic speed. All for One punched through several layers of solid rock, until his body came to an abrupt stop at a giant stone column, but before he could recover, Drakkon was already upon him. Drakkon's every move was pure combat mastery, a blend of every martial art Tommy Oliver had ever learned combined with Izuku Midoriya's analytical mind. Karate, Judo, Taekwondo, Muay Thai, Kisi, Krav Maga, Power Rangers hand-to-hand combat, and an instinctive connection to the morphin grid. He didn't fight with instinct or brute force, he fought with surgical precision. Every blow he threw was calculated, every impact destabilized his opponent. His power wasn't just strength, it was an art. All for One spat blood, for the first time in years, but he didn't back down. In a lightning movement, he activated his gravity manipulation quirk, doubling Drakkon's weight in an instant. His body pressed down to the ground with a seismic rumble. All for One smiled, extending his hand and creating a spear of black energy with the plasma condensation quirk. Let's see if you can withstand this. He threw the spear straight at Drakkon's helmet, a golden flash enveloping Drakkon, and before the weapon could reach him, his hand caught it in midair with ease, his eyes under his helmet glowing with a radiant golden light. You don't fight a man, Demon King. His armor flashed with pure energy. You're fighting against a god. The spear disintegrated in his hand. All for One tensed. Drakkon disappeared from his sight for an instant, and then he felt the most intense pain of his existence. A single direct blow to his torso sent the Demon King into the air, launching him kilometers into the air before Drakkon appeared above him and slammed him back down to the ground with a devastating kick, the impact creating a crater 10 kilometers in diameter. The entire planet felt the battle. In the sky, storms formed in response to the collision of opposing energies. From space, the battle looked like a volcanic eruption of pure power. All for One crawled out of the crater, his regeneration working at full capacity, his pride wounded, his body shattered, but his will still intact. Impressive, he said, his voice trembling for the first time in his life. Then I'll have to use everything I've got. Drakkon watched him from the rim of the crater, his posture calm and commanding. Do it. It won't change anything. While in the skies above the Pacific Ocean, now divided by the fury of the two titans fighting below, had become a colossal battlefield. From the cockpit of the Phoenixord, Melissa Shield watched with a mixture of focus and fervor as the approaching invasion fleet approached. All for One had rallied the remnants of the world to challenge her empire. But she wouldn't let that happen. Around her, hundreds of Sentinel Rangers in their own Zords flew in formation, ready to face the horde of heroes and mercenaries that was coming towards them. Nejire, Tamaki and Kirishima led the enemy offensive. Nejire, wrapped in her characteristic blue glow, soared through the air with her quirk, launching waves of energy in all directions. Tamaki had transformed into a hybrid beast of multiple animals, with sharp claws and hardened skin ready for combat. And Kirishima led the advance of the fighters, proudly challenging the supremacy of the Sentinel Rangers. Melissa watched their faces on the analysis screen. She knew why they were here. They wanted to avenge Mirio and Bakugo, who had fallen to Drakkon in Deka City. Sentinels, deploy formation in Delta, we will not allow them to set foot on our island. With those words the Island army launched an attack. The Phoenix Zord opened its wings of fire, leaving a golden and red trail in the sky while firing its fire cannon, a burst of superheated flames that incinerated several ships of the enemy fleet instantly. The Sentinel Rangers in their smaller Zords engaged the heroes one-on-one, blocking their advance with energy shields and coordinated attacks, but Nejire, Tamaki, and Kirishima did not back down. "Back off, Drakkon's monsters!" Nejire shouted, launching a spiral attack straight at Melissa. The impact was devastating, but the Phoenix Zord absorbed the energy with its thermal barrier, dissipating the wave without suffering any damage. "They'll have to do better than that." Tamaki appeared from the side trying to tear off one of the Phoenix Zord's wings, but Melissa reactivated the Zord's thrusters, spinning it with an explosive motion and launching it back into the ocean with a burst of fire. "Tamaki!" Nejire shouted, diverting her course to help him. Kirishima, still in his unbreakable mode, launched himself directly at the Phoenix Zord's cockpit, attempting to pierce through it with his destructive power. But Melissa was already expecting it. From inside the cockpit, she activated the Zord's defense system, a blast of energy hitting it in the air, launching it away before it could reach its target. Melissa exhaled calmly. "Impressive," his voice echoed over the Sentinel Rangers' radio, "but their rage won't be enough to defeat us." The battle in the sky continued with fierce intensity. Nejire, Tamaki and Kirishima refused to give up, but Melissa knew the truth: they were fighting a losing war. Because in the heart of the divided ocean, the Dragon Emperor was tearing his Demon King apart. The blows echoed like thunder, each impact raising ocean water in massive torrents that turned the arena into a chaos of tide and destruction. Lord Drakkon moved with inhuman precision. He didn't waste a single movement, every blow calculated, every dodge perfect, every counter an unstoppable hammer slamming into All for One's body. But the Demon King did not give up. He could not afford to lose. His fists were wrapped in black energy, his quirks were activated simultaneously, trying to find a weak spot in Drakkon's armor. Explosions, gravitational manipulation, sonic waves, strength boosts, regeneration to the limit, but none of his attacks were effective. Drakkon deflected, absorbed or neutralized each attack with impossible mastery. It was a dance of death, a fight between a dragon and a demon, and the demon was losing. Above, All for One's army was falling. Ships burst into flames, powered-up heroes were shot down by Sentinel Rangers, and Melissa, in the Phoenix Zord, continued to rampage with her supreme power. All for One gritted his teeth, his frustration growing. "You won't beat me." Drakkon spun with fierce momentum, dodging his blow and burying his Morphin Grid-enhanced fist into his abdomen, sending him hurling straight into a rock wall at supersonic speed. The blast from the impact shook the entire area, and for a brief moment, the Demon King remained motionless, his body forcibly regenerating. It was then that he saw it. Floating in the water, trapped among the wreckage of the battle, was a fragment of Kathleen Bates' body. His blood still contained traces of his power, and with it, the most powerful quirk that had ever existed, New Order. All for One's heart raced. It was his last chance. Drakkon noticed his gaze and frowned. "What are you up to now?" But All for One had already launched himself towards Kathleen's fragment. If he managed to assimilate New Order, he could turn the battle around. Drakkon moved to stop him, but All for One smiled, because this time, he was faster. When All for One absorbed New Order, his consciousness was drawn into the Vestige world, where the wills and echoes of his stolen quirks coexisted in a chaotic whirlwind of power. Before him, the ethereal figure of Kathleen Bate appeared, her essence just a fragmented shadow of the great heroine she once was. "You," he whispered angrily, "you don't deserve this power." But it was too late. All for One extended his will over his vestige, crushing his resistance with the supremacy of his centuries-old mind. The fight was brief, brutal and final. New Order was his, and he understood Star and Stripe's mistake. Kathleen had made a fatal mistake when she tried to use New Order against Drakkon. She tried to affect him directly, but no one could truly understand what Drakkon was. He wasn't just a man, he wasn't just Izuku Midoriya or Tommy Oliver, he wasn't just a wielder of the Morphin Grid, he was a unique entity, an anomaly in existence. A being who didn't fit into any of the world's rules, but the world could be affected, the rules could be changed. All for One smiled as he returned to reality, his body bathed in the glow of the New Order. The air vibrated, Space distorted, and the laws of nature began to rewrite themselves to his will. The air around Drakkon becomes as hot as the sun. The atmosphere ignited instantly, temperatures soaring to cosmic levels in a radius around the Dragon Emperor. The battle arena melted into crystal, the ocean evaporated in seconds, and the heat pressure collapsed the space around them. But All for One didn't stop there. The ground beneath Drakkon is as dense as a neutron star. Gravity on Drakkon increases by 1,000. The oxygen around Drakkon turns to poison. The rules of the world were changing and Drakkon was caught up in them. All for One laughed, his face beaming with power. You are not invincible. Not even the gods can defy the rules of the universe. Drakkon, caught in the vortex of impossible conditions, stood still. The ground split, the seas boiled, and the air itself roared with the fury of a newborn sun. All for One raised his arms in victory. The skies continued to roar, the remains of the downed ships fell like flaming shooting stars, and the aerial combat between the Sentinel Rangers and All for One's army continued with inhuman ferocity. But in the midst of all that, from the cockpit of the Phoenix Zord, Melissa assessed the situation in an instant. Nejire, Tamaki, and Kirishima had marked her as their target, the three of them consumed by anger, the thirst for revenge for the deaths of Mirio and Bakugo blinding them. They were strong, they were elite of the Demon King's army, but she was the Phoenix Empress. With absolute calm, she pressed a command into the Phoenix Zord. Autopilot engaged, autonomous combat mode, fiery eclipse, protocol. The Phoenix Zord's lights flickered, and the mechanical colossus's artificial intelligence took control, adjusting its flight and preparing its offensive systems for further combat. Melissa got up from her seat and jumped into the void. As she fell through the sky, she opened her morpher and activated her secret card. Battleizer, Sky Ace Fighter Mode. A burst of golden fire engulfed his body, and his ranger suit transformed into a stylized battle armor. His helmet disappeared, replaced by a metal headband with a shining visor, leaving his golden hair flowing freely in the wind. On his back, 6 fiery blades extended, roaring like wings of living fire. In his right hand, a black and red sword appeared, its blade wrapped in golden flames that crackled intensely. Melissa was no longer just a ranger, she was an angel of war, and just as Nejire, Tamaki and Kirishima launched themselves at her, their eyes full of rage, Melissa counterattacked. With a single flap of his fiery wings, he propelled himself to supersonic speed, disappearing from sight, Nejire being the first to react. Don't lose sight of her. But Melissa was already upon them. With a devastating swing, her fiery sword sliced through the air, releasing a crescent-shaped wave of fire. The explosion separated the three heroes, forcing them to dodge in different directions, but Melissa wouldn't let them regroup. He launched himself straight at Tamaki, who was barely able to raise his arms, transformed in defense. Manifest Shellfish Shield. Thick chitin plates formed in front of him, trying to absorb the impact, but it wasn't enough. Melissa's sword pierced the defense with ease, generating a blast of heat that launched Tamaki hundreds of meters away. Before he could recover, Nejire was already launching a spiraling blast of energy. Wave Motion Impact Cannon. Melissa spun in the air and activated her rear blades, which shot towards Nejire like flaming meteors. The heroine barely dodged the first attack, but the flames were so intense that her uniform was partially burned. Melissa appeared behind her in an instant, too slow. With a perfect spin, he landed a fiery kick on Nejire's back, sending her straight into the ocean. Only Kirishima remained. The red-haired hero launched himself with all his power, activating his quirk in its most powerful form. Red Riot Unbreakable. His body became a fortress of stone and steel, with thorns and plates of natural armor covering every inch of his skin. With a scream of fury, he threw a direct blow to Melissa's face. But she met it fearlessly, activating her wings at their maximum power. Melissa deflected the blow with a burst of fire, evaporating even the moisture in the air. Kirishima staggered. At that moment, she counterattacked. With a graceful yet lethal move, Melissa spun around, kicking Kirishima's hardened abdomen, the impact fracturing his unbreakable armor. Kirishima felt real pain as he fell to his knees. Revenge won't make you strong, Kirishima. With another kick she sent him plummeting into the ocean. Melissa floating in the air, her armored dress glowing in the fire of battle. An admirable but futile attempt. With his sword still smoldering with energy, he turned to look at the horizon and the sky roared as his sword transformed into a colossal cannon of golden flames. Its brilliance illuminated the battlefield, a heavenly glow of pure fire that consumed everything in its path. The troops of All for One's army, still fighting desperately, looked on in horror at the fiery apocalypse that was about to be unleashed upon them. Nejire and Tamaki barely managed to react in time, using their speed to dodge the impact zone. But Kirishima didn't run away, despite his injuries, despite the pain in his body, despite the overwhelming defeat they faced. He launched an attack, his quirk activated to its maximum, his skin hardening beyond any limits he had ever reached before, and with unwavering determination, he flew to intercept the blast. You shall not pass. The fire cannon erupted. A miniature sun exploded in the air. The golden fire engulfed Kirishima completely. For a brief moment, his silhouette stood firm in the air and then disappeared without a trace. Nejire and Tamaki watched in horror as their friend died. One of the strongest hearts, one of the noblest, had been erased from the world. There was no body, no ashes, just fire. Melissa lowered the barrel, which began to cool, emitting steam as the energy recharge restarted. Nejire and Tamaki didn't miss the opportunity. With screams of fury and despair, they launched themselves at her, but Melissa wasn't defenseless. The 6 fiery blades on her back moved in formation, spinning as if they had a mind of their own. Nejire Hato's scream drowned out by the roar of battle as one of the blades struck a perfect downward slash. The flaming blade pierced her face, slicing her left eye with precision. If Tamaki hadn't reacted at the last moment, grabbing her waist with one of his tentacles and pulling her back, Nejire would have been split in half. But they wouldn't give up. Kirishima's death, the fall of their comrades, all that remained of their fight was in this last attack. Tamaki gritted his teeth, feeling his body at its limit, but he activated his final transformation. Kraken. His body expanded, becoming a colossal monster, an amalgamation of his most powerful manifestations: octopus tentacles, crab claws, steel-hardened shark scales, and an impact-resistant exostructure. Nejire, her eye bloodied, channeled all her energy into her final attack. Nejire Flood. A spiral of blue energy waves resonated through the air, growing in power with each second, a technique he had been perfecting, a far more devastating version of his classic spiral attack. Melissa, up above, looked down at them. She knew this was the best they could do and that they were giving everything they had, but it wouldn't be enough. Her golden flame cannon returned to its black and red sword form, glowing with the fire of her absolute power. Her eyes blazed brightly as she spread her arms, and her armored dress burst into flames, enveloping her in an aura of pure fire. Afterburners. With a golden flash, Melissa shot her body forward like an arrow, a line of fire that cut through the storm of enemy attacks. Both attacks burned before even touching her. As she passed between them, the heat of his fiery energy was too much. Her eyes widened in horror and she screamed in agony. In an instant, their flesh and bones evaporated, reduced to ash upon contact with Melissa's absolute heat, the hero's last breath disappearing in the wind. Melissa rose into the air, pausing high above the battlefield, looking down at the remains of what had once been her enemies. His sword crackled with residual fire, still smoldering. He closed his eyes and sighed. They didn't have to die. He knew that if they had accepted the truth, if they had understood Lord Drakkon's vision, they could have found a new purpose. But instead, they clung to revenge in the old world, that never leads to anything but ashes. Their fiery wings flapped, and Melissa turned to return to the war. Only the Demon King remained. In the dark abyss, where the ocean had been evaporated and the fighting arena had become a crucible of pure energy, All for One gloated in his apparent victory. Lord Drakkon was trapped. The Morphin Grid roared with fury, trying to resist the rules imposed by the New Order, but even infinite power was subject to the laws of reality when someone rewrote them. The air was fire, the ground was a prison, and gravity crushed it. All for One raised his hand wrapped in dark energy, ready to give the final order, a single sentence and he would banish Drakkon from this world and take everything he conquered. But before he could say it, a burning silhouette fell from the sky. "Hey, quirk thief!" A kick wrapped in golden flames impacted with brutal force on his torso, launching him across the abyss with the speed of a meteor. The entire ground shook with the impact. As the dust and fire cleared, Melissa slowly descended, her armor glowing with scorching heat, the already crystallized ground beneath her feet instantly melting due to the extreme temperature of her Sky Ace fighter mode battleizer. Her fiery wings roared behind her, emitting flashes of pure heat that distorted the air around her, her eyes fixed on the figure of Lord Drakkon, still trapped under the conditions of the new order. I couldn't let this continue. Izuku had to break free. He turned slowly, watching as All for One rose from the crater he'd been sent into. His regeneration was working at its limit, but the impact of the kick had still left him reeling. His gaze, full of hatred and surprise, was fixed on Melissa. "You damn quirkless." Melissa smirked, adjusting her grip on her burning sword. "Did you think you could only play with Izuku?" Her body radiated pure energy, her power clashing with the new order distortions, keeping her protected from their effects. "If you want to win this war, thief," he said, pointing his sword at him, "you're going to have to go through me first." The Demon King growled in rage, charging at her with all his fury, activating multiple quirks at the same time. But Melissa wasn't a simple warrior, she was the Phoenix Empress and she was ready to burn him to ashes. For the first time in centuries, All for One hesitated. The woman in front of him wasn't referring to his enemy as Lord Drakkon, or the Dragon Emperor. She called him Izuku. That meant she was special to him. An emotional connection was a weakness, an opportunity he could exploit, as he had with Shigaraki, as he had with countless victims before. He could manipulate her, corrupt her, and turn her into his ally, but before his mind could even form a plan, Melissa's shield moved. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." His speed was absurd. Before All for One could react, Melissa was upon him, her sword engulfed in golden flames coming down with a devastating blow. The burning blade slammed into his left arm, cutting through his regenerative defenses like paper. The Demon King gritted his teeth, his body barely able to withstand the devastating energy of the morphin grid eroding his quirks. His regeneration tried desperately to restore the burned tissue, but it took too long. What the devil? Melissa didn't stop, her back blades spinning in formation, propelling her in a lethal dance of attacks at impossible speed. Every blow was a living firestorm, every slash leaving burning furrows on All for One's body, his hardened skin not enough, his regeneration barely able to keep up and his body suffering with every attack. Melissa was overwhelming him. "Your problem, thief," Melissa slid behind him in the blink of an eye, "is that you think this story ends with a Demon King winning." Before he could react, she kicked him in the spine so hard that his body arched in the air. Melissa spun around, lifting herself on her wings, and slashed diagonally across his exposed back. The fiery explosion lit up the entire chasm. All for One screamed as he felt his back split in a massive burn, his battle suit shattered, his skin regenerating only to be burned again. Melissa landed gracefully on the molten ground, looking down at him with a stern look. "I'm sorry, but this story has another ending." All for One staggered, his red eyes flashing with fury and disbelief. He couldn't lose here, not against her. But Melissa wasn't fighting to win, she was fighting to buy Izuku time. Behind them, in the vortex of chaos and energy, Lord Drakkon was beginning to move. In a war room in Tartaros, the president of the Hero Commission watched the broadcast on a giant screen, her team behind her. This was her last move, her last hope. "Broadcast it to everyone." "Ma'am, are you sure?" one of the technicians asked, sweat running down his forehead. "Everyone must see this. Everyone must know who the true ruler of this world is." Every television, telephone, holographic panel, and radio on Earth broadcast the final battle, screens in every corner of the world showing the fight that would define the fate of humanity. The streets of Japan, America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America were filled with citizens watching with bated breath, regardless of whether they were heroes, mercenaries, civilians, or villains. At first, hope was dim. Lord Drakkon descending upon the battlefield, with a power surpassing any known quirk, the hero's former followers felt their hearts fall. "He's too powerful. There's no way to win." But then All for One did the unthinkable. He used New Order. When the broadcast showed how the prison of absolute rules trapped Lord Drakkon, the world held its breath. "He's got it. He caught it." Hope exploded in the hearts of the desperate. "Fight, Demon King. Kill the dragon. This is the end of Drakkon." In every corner of the world, fallen former governments, resistance factions, and ordinary citizens who had lost everything were celebrating. "We could have held out all this time. We could have fought. If All for One defeats him, we can take back our cities, our lives." But others did not believe in victory so easily. Deep within Island, The Ranger sentries protecting civilians in the bunkers watched the broadcast with cold, calculated expressions. One of the commanders, dressed in black and gold armor, spoke calmly. "It's not over yet, but he's trapped. Then you should ask yourselves." The sentinel turned to his soldiers, his visor glowing with confidence. "How long can reality contain a god?" The quirkless citizens watched the broadcast with their hearts in their throats. The screens showed the unthinkable: Lord Drakkon, trapped, the Phoenix Empress, facing off alone against the Demon King to buy time. Fear ran through the crowd. He had never been defeated. He can't lose, right? To the outside world, Lord Drakkon was a tyrant, a conqueror who bent humanity under his thumb. Melissa Shield was a traitor, the woman who abandoned her homeland to become queen of an empire no one asked for. They were called monsters, oppressors, or false gods, but to the civilians of Island, to those who had been trampled, forgotten, and abandoned, they were saviors. Lord Drakkon gave them a home when the world cast them away. Melissa gave them the technology and protection to live without fear. Here on Island, no one was less than anyone else for being born quirkless. No one was trash. They were free, and now, their emperor was trapped while their empress fought alone against hell. The quirkless citizens clenched their fists, fear turning to rage. A young mother with a child in her arms wiped her tears and stood up. "They can't lose." Voices began to rise. "They saved us. They gave us a home. We are the Drakkon Empire. We will not surrender." From deep within the bunker, chants began to grow. "Lord Drakkon! Lord Drakkon! Lord Drakkon!" The voices joined together as a roar, a single will demanding the return of their emperor, and as his people called out to him, in the abyss of power, the New Order prison began to fracture. The cracks in the New Order prison began to expand, the universe itself trembled as billions of souls merged into a single voice that rose above all others. The quirkless, the forgotten, the rejected, those the world cast away, they called out to their emperor and he listened. Within the vortex of absolute rules, Izuku Midoriya, not Lord Drakkon, not the conqueror, not the quirkless god, but the boy the world tried to murder, reached out, and the void responded. From the depths of their ancient dimensional prison, a weapon crossed the barrier of infinity, guided by the unwavering faith of its people, the Saba sword. The relic of his power returned to its owner. Drakkon's helmet cracked, and a single golden eye glowed in the darkness. The New Order prison shattered, the air exploding in a storm of golden lightning and emerald fire. Izuku was free. All for one recoiled in disbelief. "No, you can't escape New Order. The rules of the universe are on my side." Izuku looked down, his body glowing with pure energy as he materialized his dragon dagger in his other hand. "My people called me and I do not intend to fail them." And he proved it in an instant. Before All for One could give a new order, Izuku launched an attack, but he didn't do it alone. Melissa was already on the move. Their movements synchronized in a dance of fire and golden lightning, a strike from the dragon dagger followed by Melissa's fiery blades. A slash from the Saba sword combined with the Empress's fire cannon. His attacks were precise, fast, unstoppable in a dance of death. All for One tried to defend himself, using all the quirks at his disposal, but it was no longer enough. Each attack from Drakkon and Melissa cut deeper, each fiery blast destroying faster than their regeneration could keep up. The Demon King was being overtaken. For the first time in his long existence, All for One felt what it was like to be the hunted, the fire of the phoenix and the fury of the dragon combined as one. "This is true power," Izuku roared, charging the finishing blow. And Melissa smiled fiercely. "And this is the end of your reign." With one final slash, flames and lightning erupted into the chasm and All for One screamed as his body shattered. The golden sparks of the morphin grid corroded every cell of his existence. The quirks that had made him immortal crumbled, his flesh slowly evaporated, his essence turned to cosmic ash. No, he couldn't die, not after coming so far, not after subduing this world for so long, and much less after coming so close to reclaiming his throne. With a roar of pure fury, he activated his last resort, Overhaul's quirk. The scorched sand beneath his feet became a storm of biomass, the shattered bodies of his own fallen soldiers merging with him, the remains of his generals, the bones of defeated heroes, the organs of annihilated mercenaries, everything was absorbed, recomposed, reconfigured. The quirks of his own fallen troops were ripped from their corpses and absorbed into his mutant body. His blackened skin regenerated with a metallic texture, his bone structure was reinforced with the properties of hardening and titanium quarks, his blood became pure energy, fueled by the remnants of high-powered quarks. When the smoke cleared, All for One was no longer human, his body had mutated into something monstrous, an abomination of flesh, metal, and dark energy, a being composed of thousands of absorbed souls, a titan of absolute power. His voice, now distorted by the number of fused quirks, echoed like nightmarish thunder. "I'm not going to die." All for One roared, his body emitting pulses of pure destruction, but Drakkon and Melissa would not back down, ready to finish the Demon King once and for all. Melissa launched herself like a fiery meteor, activating afterburners, her battle armor consuming the air around her with golden flames. His black and red sword flashed, and with a killing swing, he slashed through the chest of the monstrosity All for One had become. But it wasn't enough. The Demon King's mutated body barely withstood the flames, his forced regeneration keeping him standing, and in the next instant, his massive claw closed around Melissa's neck. The Phoenix Empress writhed, trying to break free, but All for One held on tight, his distorted smile dripping with madness and despair. "You can't win, no matter how many times you hit me." The pressure increased. Melissa groaned, feeling her armor creak under the Demon King's crushing force, but before he could shatter it, a flash of silver cut through the air, and in the next instant, the arm holding her up was severed. The Saba blade whistled through the air, spinning precisely before returning to its owner's hand. Lord Drakkon stood there, his suit torn by battle, his helmet cracked, revealing a glowing golden eye. But his energy had not diminished, if anything, it had increased. The dragon dagger shone in his left hand, the Saba sword in his right. Drakkon stood next to Melissa, who gasped, catching her breath. All for One roared in agony, his severed arm burning with the energy of the morphin grid. Melissa wasted no time. "Let's get this over with." His sword reconfigured into its final form, the golden fire cannon expanding on his right arm. Lord Drakkon raised his dragon dagger. "This is the end, Demon King." The emerald energy of the morphin grid began to flow from the dagger, and Melissa channeled her own power into the charge of her cannon. Fire and golden lightning began to merge. The air vibrated, the ground split, and the universe itself held its breath. "Dragon Phoenix," Melissa roared. "Final judgment," Drakkon declared. Melissa's cannon roared with a shot impossible to contain. The dragon dagger amplified the attack. A column of fire and golden lightning shot out from the cannon, enveloping All for One in a cataclysm of absolute energy. The Demon King's scream was drowned in the storm. The end had come. All for One's body dissipated into nothingness. There were no remains, no ashes, no trace that the tyrant who had ruled the world in the shadows for centuries had ever existed. He had been completely erased. The combined attack of Lord Drakkon and Melissa had eradicated his essence from reality, and with that, the final battle was over. The waters of the ocean, which had been parted by the fury of combat, closed in with an apocalyptic roar, burying the last arena of battle in the depths of the abyss. All for One had fallen. Lord Drakkon and Melissa were the victors. With a burst of momentum, Izuku and Melissa returned to the floating island, leaving behind the now submerged crater where the Demon King had fallen, but as soon as they touched the ground, Melissa immediately turned around. "Izuku." Her tone wasn't that of the Phoenix Empress or the commander-in-chief of the Drakkon Empire, it was the tone of Melissa Shield, the woman who cared for him. Before Izuku could react, Melissa grabbed him by the face, forcing him to look at her. Through the crack in his visor, she saw his golden eye and a thin line of blood. Her heart stopped for a second. "Are you hurt?" His voice became lower, more worried. Before he could respond, Melissa forcefully removed his helmet, giving him no choice. Izuku frowned, but didn't stop her. His face was exposed, and Melissa immediately began to examine him. With his fingers, he touched his forehead, his jaw, his temple, looking for serious wounds, although he only found a superficial cut above his left eyebrow, nothing serious. But his concern did not diminish. Izuku noticed the intensity in her gaze. Melissa had seen the possibility of losing him and couldn't stand it. A silence formed between them as the remnants of the battle dissipated around them. Finally, Melissa closed her eyes and rested her forehead against Izuku's. "Don't make me worry like that again." Izuku exhaled slowly, a faint smile crossing his face. "I don't plan to do it." And with that, the world saw the birth of a new era. In a dark room, lit only by the glow of the broadcast screens, the chairwoman of the Hero Commission sat with her shoulders slumped, her face covered in shadows. Behind her, the last members of the resistance remained silent. No one said anything because they knew what had happened. The images spoke for themselves. All for One was disintegrated, erased from existence. The Demon King, the last bastion of resistance against the Drakkon Empire, had fallen and the entire world had watched. Billions of people were waiting for a miracle, a message that would give them hope, something that said they could still fight. But that miracle would never come. The president cleared her throat, but her voice trembled for the first time in her life. Citizens of the world, he paused. No words could change the inevitable. His eyes, exhausted and hopeless, looked at the camera as he spoke the words that sealed the fate of humanity. We lost. The silence that followed his statement was devastating. From Japan to the Americas, Europe, Africa, South America, and Asia, the millions of citizens watching the broadcast felt the last spark of resistance go out. All for One was our last chance, and he fell to Lord Drakkon and the Phoenix Empress. The heroes have failed, the governments have collapsed, the old world is dead. The president closed her eyes, her voice trembling with frustration and resignation. The world now belongs to the Drakkon Empire. The broadcast went dark for a moment, and when the screens came back on, they no longer showed the commission. Now, on the screen, two imposing figures were seen: Lord Drakkon, Izuku Midoriya, and Melissa Shield, the Phoenix Empress, both standing, victorious. Behind them, the banners of the Drakkon Empire waved majestically. Izuku stepped forward, his golden gaze piercing the screen like divine judgment. Citizens of the world, his voice was firm, unwavering, full of absolute authority. Today the fate of humanity has been sealed. The old world died, its leaders failed, its heroes could not save it. Melissa continued, her tone calm but firm. But that doesn't mean the future has to be one of despair. Izuku crossed his arms, his armor shining with the remnants of the battle. The Drakkon Empire is not your enemy. Melissa nodded, her golden hair falling in fiery waves. They have no reason to fear the Empire. The transmission spread throughout the world. From the rubble of the destroyed cities, to the survivors in the hidden bunkers, all looked on in awe and fear at the new rulers. Lord Drakkon raised his hand. The world you knew no longer exists, but we give you a choice. Melissa looked straight into the camera, her expression calm but stern. You can continue to cling to a broken past, or you can join us and build a new future. Izuku reached out, as if offering the fate of the world in his palms. We will not destroy them, we will raise them up. The screen went black and thus, the Drakkon Empire became the new masters of Earth. Toshinori Yagi's apartment was in absolute silence. The curtains were closed, the room dark, illuminated only by the holographic screen floating in front of him. The transmission repeated over and over again the image of Lord Drakkon, next to Melissa. The world he swore to protect now belonged to them. The sacrifice of his teacher, Nana Shimura, of the wielders of One for All, his own sacrifice and Mirio's sacrifice, it had all been in vain. For the first time in his life, Toshinori wanted to get drunk so he could forget, to drown his guilt in alcohol, but he couldn't. The wounds All for One left him so many years ago took away his stomach and several of his organs. He couldn't drown his suffering, he could only live with it. He ran a trembling hand over his face, feeling his cold skin, feeling his weak, withered body. He didn't want to believe the truth, he didn't want to accept that all of this could have been avoided. If he had been less harsh on Izuku Midoriya, perhaps this future wouldn't exist. If he had spoken out when the commission killed Inko and Izuku, instead of staying silent, if he had protected his friend David's shield when he discovered the truth and was silenced, if he had done something, anything, to help Melissa when she was catatonic, but didn't. Because he wasn't the symbol of peace, he was a coward. His hands clenched into trembling fists, the ghosts of his past haunted him, and now, there was nothing left to fight for. The world had elected Lord Drakkon and he could only watch from the shadow of his own failure. The whiskey bottle hit the wall and shattered, scattering the golden liquor across the floor of his apartment. He couldn't stand it anymore. The weight of his guilt was unbearable. His trembling fist slammed on the table in front of him, his breathing becoming erratic. Damn it, he growled, teeth clenched, feeling anger and hatred consuming him from within. I don't hate Drakkon or Melissa, but himself, because all this was his fault. He believed the lies of the Hero Commission. When the president told him that the death of Izuku Midoriya and his mother was a necessary sacrifice for the stability of the world, he said nothing. When David Shield discovered the truth, he did not protect him. When Melissa fell into the abyss of pain, lost in her own suffering, he betrayed her, left her alone, and above all because that day, when the young Izuku Midoriya approached her with hope in his green eyes, asking only for a chance. When Toshinori looked at the boy who dreamed of being a hero, he spat out the worst of condemnations. "You can't be a hero." Those words haunted him, and now, the child he rejected, the child he abandoned, was the emperor of the world. Toshinori brought his hands to his face, his body trembling, tears falling down his worn face. For the first time in years, there was no one who could forgive him anymore. He knew he had lost everything. The Drakkon Empire had established itself as the sole absolute authority in the world, its dominion unalterable and unbreakable. Sentinel Rangers patrolled every corner of the planet, ensuring peace and order, eliminating any attempt at rebellion before it could even begin. Fallen governments were replaced by administrators loyal to the Empire, and island technology had ushered humanity into an era of advancement never before seen. The world that existed before was dead. This was the new order. From the balcony of Drakkon Tower, in the heart of Island, Melissa watched the future, holding a baby in her arms. Little Izuku Midoriya Shield, her newborn daughter, slept peacefully on her mother's lap. Her green hair, just like Izuku's, and her blue eyes, a reflection of Melissa's, shone with sweetness and peace. Melissa tenderly caressed her cheek, with a soft smile on her face. This little girl was the symbol of the new era. A tribute to the woman who was unjustly taken from the world, a testament to the love they shared. Melissa turned her gaze down to the training grounds. There, Izuku, Lord Drakkon, was training his eldest son, David. A 5-year-old boy, with blonde hair like his mother, but with the green eyes and determination of his father. David Midoriya Shield, the first heir to the Empire. Melissa watched him stand in front of his father, his small body in a fighting stance, while Izuku patiently corrected his form. "Don't attack with emotion, David," Izuku said, his voice calm but firm. "Emotion clouds technique. Think before you move." David frowned, concentrating, absorbing his father's every word. Izuku was training him since he was a child, not as a simple warrior or a simple heir, but as an emperor. Melissa smiled proudly. Her family was strong, their empire was unbreakable, the world belonged to them, and their legacy would never be forgotten. The dragon and the phoenix ruled the earth, and now their lineage would ensure their reign for generations. The world revolved under the rule of the Drakkon Empire. What was once a planet fractured by conflicts between heroes and villains, by discrimination and inequality, now functioned with perfect efficiency. The old corrupt nations and governments were replaced by those who accepted the new order, individuals loyal to the Dragon Emperor and the Phoenix Empress, who understood that stability was more important than personal power. Cities thrived under the watchful eye of the Sentinel Rangers, crime was reduced to non-existent levels, and island technology revolutionized medicine, energy, and universe exploration. But perhaps the most significant change was the fate of those born quirkless. In the old world, the quirkless were outcasts, people who were seen as weak, useless, unworthy of respect. That stigma was destroyed forever. Now, children born without quirks were taken to Island, where they were offered the greatest gift humanity had ever known, the power of the Morphin Grid. Now, being quirkless wasn't a flaw, it was a blessing. Children grew up knowing that one day they would be more than just humans. They would be Sentinel Rangers, the protectors of the new order. The same ones who had been despised were now the elite of humanity. The age of heroes was over, the age of the Drakkon Empire was over, and the world would never be the same again. From the top of a skyscraper under construction, Ochako Uraraka gazed at the city skyline with a calm expression. The setting sun reflected its light on the reconstructed buildings, symbols of the Drakkon Empire's advance. 10 years had passed since the battle in Deka City, since the world she knew collapsed and a new order was established. She was no longer the girl who dreamed of being a heroine. After that battle, he dropped out of UA and returned home, helping his parents in their construction business. For a time, he feared the UN imposed compulsory recruitment in his desperation, but that day never came. Lord Drakkon destroyed the entire resistance before they even had a chance to recruit, and after that the world changed. As the Drakkon Empire consolidated its absolute control, cities began to expand at an unprecedented rate, with new infrastructure, fortresses, and settlements rising on every continent. Construction companies became essential industries to keep the empire moving forward, and his family's business boomed with construction contracts. For the first time in his life, his family had stability. They were no longer struggling to survive, they were no longer worried about money, and his parents no longer had to sacrifice every day to get by. Thanks to her zero-gravity quirk, Ochako secured contracts with the empire, facilitating the construction of skyscrapers, walls, and structures in hard-to-reach areas. She wasn't the heroine she'd once dreamed of being, but she'd found a purpose, something real and tangible, a life of security, a stable job, a home for her family. And although sometimes, deep in her mind, she remembered those days of youth, the dreams of being a hero, she never felt remorse for not having fought against Lord Drakkon. At the end of the day he won, and now, the world worked better than it had ever done. In a glass and steel office, Momo Yaoyorozu reviewed production data on her holographic screen. The afternoon sun illuminated the futuristic city beyond the windows, a metropolis built under the supremacy of the Drakkon Empire. The Battle of Deku City was not only the beginning of the end for the heroes, but also for the entire power system to which their family belonged. The Yaoyorozu, one of Japan's most influential families, had fallen into irrelevance when the world went to war. Her parents kept her isolated, hoping their influence could protect her, and it worked for a while. They managed to avoid compulsory recruitment, remaining in the shadows until the Drakkon Empire emerged as the sole dominant force. But when the dust settled, the reality was clear. Surnames no longer meant anything. Noble titles, old fortunes, political connections, everything had become useless in the new order. But Momo wasn't just her last name or a pretty face. She knew how to run businesses, how to operate in the real world, and had a power that made her invaluable. When her parents clung to a dead past, she took control of her own destiny. With her creation quirk, Momo found her new purpose in the empire's economy. Using his advanced knowledge in chemistry and manufacturing, he began producing rare and valuable materials, from high-strength metal alloys to advanced synthetic polymers. The Sentinel Rangers, the Island factories, the new empire settlements, all needed resources, and she became the main supplier. Companies that accepted the new order saw her as a key ally, and the empire's administrative leaders recognized her usefulness. Even Melissa Shield, the Phoenix Empress, personally approved some of his development projects. Momo was a strategist, and in a world where power was no longer measured in quirks, but in what you could contribute, she adapted and prospered. Looking at the export and production data, confirming that another shipment was ready to be sent to Island, he sighed calmly, adjusting his business suit. She wasn't the heroine she dreamed of being as a child, but she'd reinvented herself, found her place in the new world and the Drakkon Empire, and that was all that mattered. Although she never stopped caring about others, even though the world had changed, even though her dreams of being a hero had faded in the conquest of the Drakkon Empire, her heart was always focused on helping. And he wouldn't allow those who once called the UA home to fade into irrelevance, so with all the resources and contacts he had amassed, he began to hunt them down. One by one, he offered them a place in the new empire, not as warriors, but as essential pieces of the new future. When Momo found Denki, he had spent years surviving on the streets of Japan, without purpose or direction, but his quirk was invaluable in the modern age. The expansion of the Drakkon Empire brought with it larger and more advanced cities, monumental structures of Island technology that required constant power. Momo took him to the Energy Development Center, where his electrical skills were honed with advanced engineering training. Now, Denki Kaminari was the chief engineer who kept the Empire's metropolises lit, channeling power to the main reactors with a precision no artificial system could match. When Momo contacted Mina, the girl still had the same spark in her personality, but she had lost her purpose. Without a world of heroes in which to shine, she didn't know where to fit in. Until Momo showed her what her quirk could truly do. The advanced alloys Momo produced required unique chemical treatments, and Mina's ability to generate acid of varying levels of corrosion made her a key player in the manufacturing of the Empire's most advanced materials. His control over his quirk grew exponentially, now able to melt and process materials that no technology could handle. She became a master of metal and polymer transformation, creating unique materials that drove the Empire's technological evolution. When the Empire began its expansion beyond Earth, Koji found his true destiny. The first settlements on distant moons and planets brought with them an unexpected problem: extraterrestrial fauna. The life forms were impossible to control, often hostile or incomprehensible to the human colonizers. Until Koji Koda arrived. With his quirk, he developed a method to communicate with alien fauna, managing to domesticate and study them in ways that conventional science had never achieved. Now, on the Drakkon Empire's space expansion front, Koji was the first contact with alien life. When Momo sought out Rikido Sato, he had spent the past few years isolated, aimless after the collapse of the hero system. But Momo knew his talents extended beyond combat. He always had a deep understanding of nutrition, and with the right funding, it helped him create the most efficient food production system in human history. Through his research, he developed ultra-efficient foods designed to optimally nourish the population, reducing the need for massive resource consumption. Now, Rikido Sato was not only the largest food producer in the Empire, but his work helped sustain the first space colonies. For the first time in his life, Yuga Aoyama stopped trembling with fear. For as long as he could remember, his existence had been defined by terror. The terror of being born quirkless in a society where that was a social death sentence, watching his parents beg before a demon, selling his fate to all for one just to give him a chance to fit in, being his spy, betraying his own friends, knowing he had no other choice. And when the desperate hero commission freed all for one, that terror became a living nightmare. The demon that controlled his destiny had returned and he had no way to escape. Until Lord Drakkon and Empress Phoenix did it for him. When Drakkon and Melissa disintegrated all for one, when the Empire rose absolute and the will of the old world was crushed mercilessly, he felt relief. For the first time, she wasn't a puppet, her life didn't belong to someone else, the devil was dead and now she had the chance to decide her own destiny. But even with all for one's fall, Yuga wasn't sure if the Drakkon Empire would accept him. He was no longer quirkless. Did he have any place in the new order? It was Momo who showed him that he could. When he found him he didn't know what to say. "I thought the Empire would never accept someone like me," he whispered. Momo smiled. "If you have something to offer the future, there's always a place for you." And Yuga discovered what he could really do. He had always been extravagant, with a sense of design and aesthetics like no other. But with Island's technology, with the Empire's unlimited resources, that sense of design became something greater. Under the tutelage of Momo and the Empire's engineers, Yuga became a spaceship designer, his knowledge of aerodynamics, structure, and energy efficiency helping to create the ships that expanded the Drakkon Empire's influence beyond Earth. Entire fleets of space explorers and conquerors were born from his designs. The skies were no longer the limit. From the top of an orbital shipyard, Yuga watched the launch of one of his newest creations, a gleaming, golden starship with a sleek, streamlined design, hurtling through the atmosphere into infinity. He smiled with pride, with genuine satisfaction. He was no longer a victim of the past, he was no longer a spy tied to a demon. Now, he was building the future of the Empire. The world fell apart once, and Tsuyu saw it all, when governments collapsed and borders closed, when chaos and despair swept through cities. She had no time to grieve or get lost in the confusion. Because he had to take care of his brothers, but even with his pragmatism, with his determination, the riots were too much. His parents died when society's safety systems failed. His brothers were persecuted and rejected simply for looking different. In the ancient world, mutants were always treated differently, sometimes with fear, sometimes with contempt. Tsuyu endured the pain, not because it was easy, but because she had no other choice. And when the Drakkon Empire emerged as the sole absolute force, for the first time in his life, he felt relief. There was no longer any distinction between anyone. The quirkless were no longer oppressed, mutants were no longer treated as oddities, the strong were strong because of what they could do, not because of how they looked. The world finally had order and their siblings would never know what it was like to be seen as a freak. As cities grew and the Empire expanded across the Earth, scientists and explorers looked to the stars. Interplanetary expansion wasn't a dream, it was a mission. But exploring the universe wasn't easy. Colonies on other worlds required brave pioneers, soldiers who could operate in extreme conditions, with resilience, agility, and adaptability. That's where Tsuyu found her true purpose. Thanks to his frog quirk, His body was designed to survive in hostile environments, to move through difficult terrain, breathe in extreme conditions, and withstand temperatures that others could not endure. She became an explorer of the Empire's new worlds, where others needed pressure suits to cross poisonous swamps on distant moons, she could move effortlessly. Where others needed weeks to map alien ecosystems, she understood them in days. Tsuyu became the leader of the Empire's exploration vanguard, the first to set foot on new worlds before they were colonized. From the deck of an orbiting starship, Tsuyu observed the virgin planet beneath her feet, a world without a name, without history, waiting to be discovered. Her brothers now lived safely in the Empire, with a future they would never have had in the old society, and she had her place in this new order. Early settlements on other planets required not only soldiers and scientists, but also pioneers who could face the unknown. For those with adaptive quirks, space became their new home. When the Drakkon Empire began to expand across the galaxy, they encountered an unexpected problem: not all planets could sustain life. The ecosystems were hostile, the atmospheres toxic, the radiation deadly, but Konoko Komori had the solution. Her mushroom quirk, which allowed her to grow mushrooms on any surface, became the key to the terraforming of new worlds. Under his supervision, strains of fungi were developed that were capable of consuming toxins, absorbing radiation, and transforming sterile soils into fertile environments. The Empire's first alien forests grew thanks to it. Now, on each new planet, its fungi were the first life form to take root. She became the mother of terraforming, the woman who gave life to dead worlds. Since he was a child, Shoji always dreamed of a world where he was not judged by his appearance. That world came in the form of the Drakkon Empire. With his multi-arms quirk, his strength, endurance, and his ability to adapt to any environment, Shoji became one of the Empire's foremost explorers. While Tsuyu led the reconnaissance expeditions, Shoji carried the equipment, secured the bases, and protected the settlers from unknown threats. And in the midst of the vastness of the universe and after years of exploring together, Shoji and Tsuyu were expecting their first child, a boy who would grow up not on Earth, but in the stars, the first generation of humans born in the intergalactic empire. Tokiyami still retained his heroic sense. The war on Earth was over, but space was a new frontier, with dangers that no one understood. On the most hostile planets, in the lightless underground caves, in the ruins of vanished alien civilizations, he was the first to enter, and dark shadow had never been stronger than in the darkness of space. Without the influence of the sun, without the presence of light, his shadow could extend further, larger, stronger than he had ever imagined. Now, Tokiyami and Dark Shadow were the first line of exploration in impossible terrain. If there was an unknown abyss, if there was a threat hidden in the blackness of the cosmos, he was the one to face it. From the surface of a newly terraformed planet, Shoji, Tsuyu, Konoko, and Tokiyami looked up at the night sky together. There were no heroes or villains or societies to judge them. Here, in the vastness of space, they were pioneers, explorers of the future. The Drakkon Empire had expanded beyond Earth, and they were among the first to see what awaited them in the infinite. From her office, Momo looked at her list of accomplishments. She had reunited her former colleagues, given a purpose to those who had lost it, perhaps not as heroes, but as essential pieces in the future of the Drakkon Empire. She sighed contentedly, closing her holographic screen. She didn't need a cloak to do good, just the intelligence to change the world from the shadows. From the top of Island, in the heart of the advanced research laboratories, Nezu watched the stars through the gigantic window of his office. The world had changed beyond anything he ever imagined. Earth was no longer the limit. Under his supervision, the scientists of Island had developed technology based on the Morphin Grid, which allowed the conquest of other planets, the extraction of resources, the expansion of the Drakkon Empire beyond the solar system. This was the progress I had always dreamed of. A world without limitations, without barriers, without borders. The Empire expanded unhindered, exploring unknown galaxies, establishing colonies on alien worlds, perfecting engineering powered by the Morphin Grid. And yet Nezu didn't know how to feel. The price of this progress had been the old world, the age of heroes, the governments, the morality that once defined society had all been erased. And now, he was a key cog in the empire that replaced everything that had ever existed. Beside him, the only person still left from his old world, Nimori, gazed at the same stellar vista. Thinking too much again, huh? Nezu let out a small laugh. I've never been able to avoid it. Nimari sighed, crossing her arms. Do you regret it? Nezu was silent for a moment. He looked at the holograms of new projects on the screen in front of him, intergalactic ships powered by the Morphin Grid, terraforming planets with advanced technology, a future he could only dream of in the past. But he remembered the faces of those who couldn't see this world, all the heroes who resisted and were erased from existence. Nezu closed his eyes for a moment, then smiled wistfully. Don't know. Nimari exhaled and placed a hand on his shoulder. The only thing that matters now is that we're here, and that we can still do something with what's left. Nezu nodded slowly. The age of heroes was over, but the Drakkon Empire kept moving forward, and as long as he kept breathing, he would make sure that knowledge never stopped growing. The door to his office swung open, without knocking or announcing himself. Only one person would have the nerve to do something like that. Nezu, Nimari, you have to see this. Mei Hatsume, the Drakkon Empire's chief engineer, entered the room with her usual brimming energy, her glasses reflecting the multiple project holograms floating around her. Nezu didn't even flinch. Mei, you could at least pretend you care about protocols. Nimari rolled her eyes. Why do we keep expecting him to respect them? Mei ignored their comments and placed a device on the table, projecting a 3D schematic. Nezu and Nimari looked at the design and their eyes widened in surprise. It was a new generation of Zords, but not just for war. They were colossal ships, advanced terraforming systems, mobile structures capable of colonizing entire planets. Mei smiled proudly. I call them expansion Zords. When Mei first saw the Phoenix Zord, she knew the truth in an instant. They had already won. That level of technology couldn't be surpassed with what the world knew, but that didn't mean she would lose. Mei wasn't a fighter or a rebel, she was an inventor, and inventors always adapt. Even before Lord Drakkon announced his victory, she locked herself in her workshop and started working. Her mind worked faster than ever, preparing a presentation for when the time came to make a decision. She knew that under Drakkon, science would have no limits. When Nezu swore loyalty to the Empire to protect the remaining students, he recommended her as one of UA's brightest minds, and coupled with her exposition on the potential of the Zords, she achieved the unthinkable. He convinced Melissa and Lord Drakkon to give him unlimited funding. With these new expansion Zords, we can colonize planets in a matter of weeks, Mei explained, her eyes shining with excitement. Each of them is designed to adapt to extreme environments, carry complete stations, and terraform on the fly. Nezu nodded, analyzing the projection. This is brilliant. Nimari whistled in admiration. You never cease to amaze me, Mei. Mei smiled with her typical confidence. It's my job. Nezu closed his eyes for a moment. He had lost the world he knew, but what they had built in its place was something much bigger. Earth was no longer humanity's only home. As Mei Hatsume walked out of the office with her signature enthusiasm, Nezu and Nimari sighed in unison, and Nezu rubbed his forehead. If the Empire ever falls, it will be because Mei has built something so big that it ends up devouring the universe. Nimari gave a tired laugh. Don't doubt it. For a moment, they both enjoyed the silence, but then, Nezu turned to Nimari curiously. By the way, Nimari, how is Eri? The question carried more weight than it seemed. Eri's name was linked to too many memories. Aizawa, Deku City, the years when the world still had heroes, and above all the fact that Eri never belonged to that old world. After Aizawa's death in the destruction of Deku City, Eri's custody was up in the air, but Nimari did not allow it. She kept Eri with her, and when the chaos of the war ended and the Empire stabilized, she officially adopted her. Nimari Kayama, the last remaining heroine of the old Uwa, became her mother. Now, Eri was 16 years old and Nimari was proud of her. Eri didn't grow up like a normal girl. She didn't have a childhood with heroes protecting her, nor did she live in a world with battles between good and evil. She grew up under the Empire. If there was one thing Nimari would always be grateful to Lord Drakkon for, it was what he did for Eri. When the Dragon Emperor learned of the girl's past and the power of her quirk, he didn't treat her as a resource. He didn't try to use his ability for the Empire's benefit. He didn't turn it into a weapon. He saw the pain in her eyes. Eri had spent her childhood living in fear of touching someone and making them disappear. But Lord Drakkon changed her destiny. With his absolute dominion over the Morphin Grid, Drakkon did the unthinkable. Using the infinite energy of the grid, he eliminated Aries' quirk completely, and for the first time in her life she was free and could embrace Nemuri without fear of making her disappear. The hospital room was cold, silent, and lifeless, like the man lying in the bed. Toshinori Yagi, the man who was once All Might, the symbol of peace, the idol of humanity, was now nothing more than a dying old man in a forgotten bed. Her body, ravaged by years of struggle, sacrifice, and the weight of her own guilt, could barely move. Her skin, pale and withered, was a shadow of what it once was, and no one remembered it except her. Melissa, the Phoenix Empress, the girl who once called him uncle in admiration, was now the woman who ruled the galaxy alongside the Dragon Emperor. She was not there to give him peace or forgiveness, she was there to remind him of his betrayal. Toshinori tried to speak, but the ventilator wouldn't let him. He could only look at her with tearful eyes, trying to beg her with his desperate gaze. Melissa looked at him coldly, without a hint of the warmth she once had for him. "I didn't come to say goodbye." His voice was firm, unwavering. "I didn't come to comfort you." She approached slowly, her imperial red dress gleaming in the dim hospital light. "I came to remind you that I will never forgive you." Toshinori's tears grew more intense, running down his wrinkled cheeks, but Melissa was unmoved. "I will never speak of you to my children." His tone was cruelly indifferent, final, like a death sentence. "When they ask me about their grandfather, I'll just tell them about David Shield." The mention of his former best friend's name hit him like a dagger to the heart. "I'll tell you how your best friend betrayed you." Toshinori tried to raise his hand, tried to say something, tried to find some way to redeem himself, but his body no longer responded. The artificial respirator continued to function mechanically, forcing his fragile life to continue for a few more moments. She could only cry in silence and suffer under the weight of her guilt. Melissa remained silent for a few seconds, watching him as if he were a stranger, a specter from an insignificant past. Then, without another word, he turned and left the room. He didn't look back, he didn't need to. Toshinori knew that when his last breath escaped, the world wouldn't even notice. Because All Might was no more and no one would ever remember him. From the shining cities of Earth to the new settlements on terraformed planets, the Drakkon Empire extended as the sole absolute authority. For the inhabitants under his rule, life was better than in any other era of humanity. Heroes had fallen, corrupt governments had been eliminated, the elites that oppressed the quirkless had been eradicated, and in their place, a new order had been born. One where a person's worth was determined not by their birth, but by their effort and loyalty, one where the quirkless were no longer the dregs of society but its pillar. The Sentinel Rangers were the world's newest force. They were the army, the police, and the protectors of the empire, each of them born quirkless. The younger ones remembered the contempt in schools, the rejection from society, the mockery of heroes who saw them as nothing, but the older ones remembered something worse. Being little more than slaves, forced to do jobs that no one wanted to do. Ignored when they demanded equality and used as cannon fodder for a system that would never see them as equals. Until Lord Drakkon and the Phoenix Empress freed them, they destroyed the old world and replaced it with something better. Each Sentinel Ranger fought with absolute conviction, not because they were forced to or out of fear, but because they themselves were proof that the Drakkon Empire was their salvation. The power of the Morphin Grid had given them the strength the world had denied them. Now they were the elite of the Empire, and the ancient heroes who had scorned them existed only in history books. The streets of the new cities were full of life. The technology of Island, combined with the advances of the Morphin Grid, had taken humanity to a level it had never reached before. Cities were clean, organized, and safe, crime was non-existent, and the economy thrived under a structure where every citizen had a purpose. The inhabitants of the Drakkon Empire did not live in fear or uncertainty. They knew that their leaders would never abandon them. The Dragon Emperor and the Phoenix Empress were not distant gods, but figures who constantly demonstrated their vision. Citizens saw them as their saviors. Quirkless families watched their children grow up with opportunities they had never imagined possible. Businesses, now adapted to the new era, flourished under the Empire's leadership. Humanity was no longer trapped in a cycle of wars between heroes and villains. Now, there was only order. The inhabitants of the Empire did not look back on the old world with nostalgia, they despised it. For them, the past was a reminder of the misery in which they once lived. The future was all that mattered, and that future belonged to the Drakkon Empire. The Drakkon Empire had achieved what the old world never could, a system where a person's value was not defined by their quirk, but by their usefulness to society. In the past, those with mutant quirks were feared or despised for their appearance, those with destructive quirks were labeled as threats, forced to live on the fringes or become villains. But under Lord Drakkon and the Phoenix Empress, those barriers disappeared. No one looked down on those born different anymore. Those who were once singled out for their appearance now lived without fear of rejection. Those who were persecuted for their mutant nature now had important roles in society. Although they couldn't become Sentinel Rangers due to the Morphin Grid's incompatibility with quirks, that didn't mean they couldn't serve the Empire. Many found their purpose in intergalactic exploration, the terraforming of new worlds, the security of space colonies, or the construction of the Empire's new cities. In the old world, there were quirks that were considered too dangerous, even if their wielders had no malicious intentions. Now, that didn't exist. Under the structure of the Drakkon Empire, there were no heroes or villains, there were only those who contributed and those who didn't. Destructive quirks were re-evaluated. Former villains, who were once rejected by their very nature, found a place in the Empire. Those with fire or explosion quirks were trained to work on the advanced engineering of Zords and energy reactors. Those with destruction or decomposition abilities were assigned to controlled demolition and hazardous materials handling, and those with darkness, fear, or mind control were integrated into hostile terrain exploration and advanced communication teams. No one was excluded by the nature of their power. The Drakkon Empire did not fear power, it used it. For many, the fall of the old world had meant the first time they were treated as equals, humanity no longer divided between heroes and villains, quirkless and powerful, beautiful and monstrous. Under the banner of the Empire, everyone had a place. If you could serve, if you could contribute, if you could strengthen the vision of the Dragon Emperor and the Phoenix Empress, then the Empire would welcome you. And so, for the first time in history, everyone had a purpose. At the top of the Drakkon Empire, Melissa Shield reigned with absolute power. She was the Phoenix Empress, the strategist who had helped transform the world and now led the Empire towards the conquest of the multiverse. Millions revered her and followed her leadership without question, but even with all her authority she was still just Melissa, and only two people treated her as such. Hidden within the vast island, in a restricted area where only those she trusted most were allowed, Melissa had a place she always returned to. It was an engineering workshop, a sanctuary where the rules of the Empire didn't apply, where only creation, innovation, and friendship existed. There, two of the Empire's brightest minds waited every night for him to escape his duties. Momo Yaoyorozu and Mei Hatsume. Not as subordinates or cogs in the Imperial machine, but as friends. Melissa, come here quickly. Look at this. Mei waved a newly designed hologram, her excitement evident. Be careful, Mei, if you push her too hard, she won't have time to relax. Momo, always poised, was reviewing a table of advanced metallic compounds. Melissa gave a light laugh, leaving her royal cloak over a chair, changing into simpler work clothes and a lab coat. For a moment, she was no longer the Phoenix Empress, she was just Melissa Shield, the enthusiastic engineer. No, I want to see it. He approached the work table where Mei was planning her latest crazy project. It was a blueprint for a new type of interdimensional exploration Zord, with thrusters capable of self-adjusting to different laws of physics in each universe. This is incredible. Melissa's eyes sparkled with fascination. How did you manage to stabilize the energy matrix without it collapsing into a low-entropy universe? Mei smiled proudly. That was the hardest part. But I managed to fine-tune the core modulation with an alloy that... Momo interrupted, with a patient smile. With an alloy that I developed. Melissa turned to look at her with excitement. Really? Momo nodded with a slight smile. It's a combination of high-performance materials we extracted from one of the terraformed planets. A metal with quantum properties that adapts to dimensional vibrations. Melissa leaned across the table, with the same emotion she had when she was younger, when she was just a dreaming engineer and not an empress. This is amazing. We have to try it. Momo and Mei looked at each other with a smile. In moments like this, Melissa wasn't the most powerful woman in the universe, she was just his friend. Outside these walls, Melissa was the Phoenix Empress, supreme leader, peerless strategist, the pillar of the Empire, but here, in this workshop she could simply be Melissa, and that was something that would never change. The Drakkon Empire no longer ruled only Earth, it had not only conquered the stars, now its goal extended beyond reality itself. From the beginning, Lord Drakkon had had a single goal, to free the quirkless from oppression in all worlds. His vision transcended time and space. With Melissa's intelligence and leadership, that dream was close to being fulfilled. The Island scientists, led by Nezu, Nimari, and Mei, had deciphered the dimensional vibration patterns and with it, the paths to other universes. The alternate universes were countless, but they found a common ground to track them: Izuku Midoriya. Each reality had its own version of Izuku. Some of them were true titans, almost at the level of Lord Drakkon. Others were still weak, crushed by the same society that had tried to destroy him, but each one was different. Melissa reviewed the reports in her office, her newborn daughter resting in her crib. Even in her temporary retirement, she continued to work on perfecting the multiversal conquest plan. Nearby universes had been located and reports spoke of versions of Izuku with powers that defied logic. An Izuku with the power of the Speed Force, a being who could run faster than time itself, an Izuku with hellish powers, practically immortal, an Izuku with the Rinne Sharingan, who possessed the power of the Six Paths and the ability to alter reality, an Izuku with the fully developed One for All, a warrior with such absolute power that he could rival gods, an Izuku with a device that allowed him to shift between different alien species, giving him an arsenal of abilities never before seen. These weren't just alternate versions of Izuku, they were champions of their own realities, but they all had something in common. In each world, quirkless and mutants were still treated like trash, and that was something Lord Drakkon wouldn't allow. From the top of Island Tower, Izuku, Lord Drakkon, watched the dimensional gate being built. It would lead to a different universe, a new battlefield, a new world to liberate. The Drakkon Empire wouldn't just conquer one reality, they would conquer the multiverse. They would unleash the quirkless in every corner of existence, and if the Izukus of those worlds stood in their way, they would crush them one by one. The multiverse would tremble at the fury of the Dragon Emperor and the Phoenix Empress. Soon, the Drakkon Empire would take its first step toward conquering the multiverse, but tonight, Izuku and Melissa weren't the Dragon Emperor and Phoenix Empress. It was just them, in the privacy of their chambers, without armor, without titles, without war strategies. Izuku and Melissa rested together, enjoying a night together before expanding their kingdom to another universe. The dim light of the room shone on their bodies, reflecting the warmth of a love that had been born in battle and strengthened in victory. Melissa, with her golden hair spread out on the bed, felt the warmth of Izuku's body next to hers, his breathing firm and deep. Izuku, lying beside her, looked at her silently, with something more than simple desire. There was something deeper in his golden gaze this time. Melissa noticed it immediately. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, sliding her hand over his chest. Izuku looked up at the ceiling for a moment before answering. "I was wondering." Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Waiting," Izuku sighed. "If you regret it." Melissa blinked, surprised. "About what?" Izuku turned his head to look directly at her. "If you had followed me." The question hung in the air, heavy, full of meaning. "If that night, in the cafe where we were going to meet for the first time." His voice became lower, more introspective. "If you had decided not to believe in me. If you had decided not to take the Phoenix Morpher." Melissa didn't say anything at first, knowing what he really wanted to ask. She knew Izuku never doubted his path, he didn't regret trusting her, but still, he wanted to hear it from her. Melissa smiled tenderly, moved slowly and brought her forehead closer to his, her blue eyes reflecting his golden gaze. "Do you really have to ask?" Izuku didn't respond, he just looked at her, waiting. Melissa intertwined her fingers with his and sighed softly. "Izuku, we have 2 children together." He caressed her cheek with his other hand, his expression softer than it had been in years. "If I had regretted being with you," her lips brushed his in a whisper, "then I would regret having our children, and that would never happen." Izuku closed his eyes for a moment, letting her presence envelop him. She didn't need to say more. The truth was in every battle they had fought together, every laugh shared in the solitude of their chambers, every night where their bodies and souls united, and in every look of love and trust. He didn't need to hear any more, now he knew the answer. And when Melissa kissed him, with a fire that rivaled his own power, all he could think about was how conquering the multiverse would mean nothing if he didn't have her by his side. At the top of Island, the rising sun illuminated the imposing buildings of the Drakkon Empire. From the balcony of his room, David Midoriya Shield, the Emperor's firstborn son, gazed at the horizon with the serious gaze of a child who had grown up surrounded by responsibilities. He was only 5 years old, but he already understood the weight of his name. He was the son of Lord Drakkon and Melissa Shield, and everyone in the Empire expected him to follow in their footsteps. Contrary to what many might think, David's life wasn't filled with luxuries. His parents allocated most of the Empire's resources to intergalactic expansion and technological development. His family's well-being was simple, focused on efficiency and functionality, not excess. He had a good life, but not one of indulgence or ostentation. His days were divided between rigorous training with his father and classes with the best teachers in the Empire. Izuku Midoriya, Lord Drakkon, was an imposing figure. During training, his gaze was firm, his voice stern. David learned from him martial disciplines, strategy, and the control of the energy of the Morphin Grid. But after the daily sessions, his father always took the time to play with him. He stopped being the Emperor and became a simple father, laughing and enjoying the moments they could share. David admired that duality. His father was a force of nature on the battlefield, but at home, he was a man who deeply loved his family. On the other hand, his mother, Melissa Shield, always seemed busy. She had just given birth to his younger sister, Izuku Midoriya Shield, yet she still found time to continue overseeing the Empire's technological advancements. But Melissa never forgot her family. Whenever she could, she would sit with David and, with a smile, explain how the ships and Zords worked, awakening in him the same passion for creation that she had. David felt a deep connection with his mother, admiring her intelligence and vision. Although she was constantly working, she always found time for him and his little sister. Despite his young age, David understood the weight of his legacy. He was no ordinary child. He was the heir to the Empire, and all eyes were on him. His parents never imposed that burden on him, but he felt it nonetheless. He knew that one day he would have to live up to expectations, prove himself worthy of his lineage. However, he felt no fear. His father had taught him that power was not about dominating, but about protecting, and his mother had shown him that true value lay not in strength, but in intelligence and innovation. And so, David Midoriya Shield grew up with the hope and determination to build a future worthy of the empire his parents had forged. A future where he would not only be the heir to a throne, but a leader who would continue the legacy of liberation and expansion that his parents began. Izuku Midoriya watched the universe bend to his will. The Drakkon Empire was absolute, the quirkless were no longer oppressed, the old power structures had been destroyed and the stars were now his to claim. Soon, his domain would expand beyond his reality, the entire multiverse would belong to him. He had achieved the dreams of two men. The dream of Izuku Midoriya, the boy who was rejected and betrayed, who only wanted to save others, and the dream of Tommy Oliver, Lord Drakkon, the warrior who wanted to unify power under his control to eliminate weakness and chaos. And yet there were nights when sleep wouldn't come to him. There were days when he wondered if his mother would be proud of what he had achieved. His mother, Izuku Midoriya, the only person who loved him unconditionally when the world turned its back on her, wondered if she would be happy to see that her son had brought order to chaos, happy that he had given power to those who needed it, or if she would see him as a monster. The idea terrified him, because now, with the opening of the multiversal portals, he knew there was a chance he could find her again. Not his mother, not the Izuku Midoriya who was killed in his universe, but other versions of her who never lost their child, never suffered the cruelty of their world, who were still loving mothers, without the tragedy that marked them. And even though neither of them was really his mother, he knew that if he ever looked into her eyes, if he ever heard her voice calling him, it would be impossible to ignore the feeling. Fear stabbed into his chest like a cold dagger. What would happen if one of them saw him not as the Dragon Emperor or the hero of the quirkless, but as a monster? Melissa always noticed when he wasn't sleeping. Sometimes, in the darkness of his room, she would turn around and hug him from behind, without needing to say anything. Other times, she would wake up to find him standing on the balcony, silently watching the stars. "You can't keep punishing yourself for what already happened." Izuku never responded. It was easy to say but impossible to let go. He wasn't afraid to take on the gods of the multiverse or destroy entire civilizations if they stood in his way. He wasn't afraid to bend reality with his power. But he was afraid of his mother, afraid of seeing her again, hearing her voice and seeing her look at him in horror. Because if that happened, maybe he would have to accept that, after all, he had become a monster. Now on the central platform of Drakkon Tower stood over the horizon of Island, surrounded by thousands of Sentinel Rangers and quirk users loyal to the Empire. From every corner of the Earth, from colonies on other planets, from space fleets preparing for interdimensional invasion, millions of soldiers watched the live broadcast. This was the decisive hour. The Drakkon Empire had already dominated its universe and it was time to expand beyond time and space. At the center of the platform, Lord Drakkon strode forward, Melissa radiating presence and power at his side, her red and gold dress reflecting the light from the screens displaying the open interdimensional portals. Without saying a word, Izuku raised his Master Morpher and activated it, a flash of green and gold energy engulfing his body, and when the light dissipated, his armor had taken form. Lord Drakkon looked up and spoke, his voice echoing across every screen, every corner of the Empire. "We have already triumphed." His tone was firm, absolute, full of the authority of a man who could not be challenged. "The old world that despised us has fallen before our power. Those who once called us weak, useless, and insignificant are now ashes." Thousands of Sentinel Rangers roared with approval. "But our mission is not over yet." He paused, watching his troops intently. "We have located other universes." The screens around him showed images of alternate versions of Izuku Midoriya. "In these worlds, versions of me will try to resist. They will try to stop us." The audience fell silent, hanging on every word. Lord Drakkon smiled with contempt. "But none of them will be a match for me." His golden eyes shone with absolute power. In their worlds, these Izukus were blind. They looked the other way while the quirkless were despised, while mutants were feared, while those with unacceptable powers were condemned to oblivion. He extended a hand toward his army, his voice charged with pure conviction. "And when they gained power, what did they do?" The army fell silent. Drakkon clenched his fist. "They did nothing." A whisper of rage ran through the ranks of the Sentinel Rangers and the Empire soldiers. They could have been gods. He let his words sink deep into every soldier, in every corner of the Empire. "And now you will kneel before me." Lord Drakkon's army was ready. The multiverse would be conquered, and the gods who never dared to save their own would now fall before the true Emperor. When Lord Drakkon stepped through the dimensional portal, he expected to arrive in another reality, to encounter new enemies, new challenges, new lands to claim in the name of his empire. But instead he found himself in a place that transcended everything he had seen before, the throne of Yggdrasil. Drakkon stopped dead in his tracks. All around him reality itself pulsed with an energy impossible to describe, golden and green filaments extending in every direction, like the roots of a cosmic tree connecting every universe, every timeline, every possibility. The morphin grid vibrated within him, giving him the certainty that this was right. It was not a mistake or an accident, it was his destiny. In the center of the throne, Loki watched him. Drakkon did not speak immediately. He coldly observed the man who was in front of him, sitting on the throne of Yggdrasil. Loki looked relaxed, but his eyes revealed the weight of years of loneliness and surveillance. Finally, Loki broke the silence. "You're taller than I imagined." Drakkon smiled slightly under his helmet. "I'm not the first conquistador you've seen, am I?" Loki tilted his head. "No, but you're the first to deserve it." He leaned slightly in his throne, resting his hands on the armrests. "For decades, I've sustained the multiverse with my very existence, barely managing to keep it standing." His tone was not one of complaint, but of simple truth. "And now, thanks to you, it has regained its stability." Drakkon didn't react immediately. Neither pride nor complacency swayed him. Instead he watched the Yggdrasil, feeling its energy, feeling the morphin grid flow through every strand of reality. Finally, he turned back to Loki. "So, now you understand what needs to be done." Loki smirked. "Of course I understand." Drakkon took a few steps forward, stopping in front of the throne. "I have conquered my universe, I have stabilized the multiverse." His voice was strong, unbreakable. "But there are still worlds that suffer." He extended a hand. "Worlds that need order." His eyes glowed with golden energy. "Join me, Loki." Loki looked at him with interest. Why would you offer me a choice? Drakkon smiled calmly. Because you understand what no one else understood. His gaze intensified. You understand that looking from a distance changes nothing. That the multiverse doesn't need observers. His voice became deeper. You need architects. The air vibrated with his declaration. Loki closed his eyes for a moment. He had waited for this moment. There was no need for a battle. Drakkon had already proven himself worthy. Slowly, he stood up, the throne no longer holding him prisoner. The Yggdrasil was no longer his burden, he was free. But the real question was, what would he do with his freedom? Loki smiled genuinely for the first time in a long time. So be it. Drakkon extended his hand. Loki took it without hesitation, and in that instant, the morphin grid accepted him. His body was enveloped in a golden glow, his connection to the multiverse reinforced, his purpose finally aligned with something greater than himself. When the light dissipated, his ranger armor had appeared, the golden ranger of the Drakkon Empire was born. Lord Drakkon smiled slightly. Welcome to the new order, Loki. Loki turned and looked at the Yggdrasil one last time. The multiverse has waited too long for someone to rule it. He turned to Drakkon. Let's give him what he needs. And with that oath, the conquest of the multiverse had begun. In another universe, the night sky shone peacefully over the city of Musudafu, its lights reflecting in the lake near the house where Izuku Midoriya and his family lived in peace. Here, in this world, Izuku wasn't an emperor or a conqueror, he was a hero, a man who had fought to save everyone. 10 years ago, the final battle against All for One nearly destroyed everything. Humanity teetered on the brink of collapse, but the heroes did not give up. It was thanks to Mirio, the final wielder of One for All, that victory was possible. He used every ounce of his power to take down the Demon King, even at the cost of his own life. The image of Mirio smiling in his final moments, telling them to keep going, was still etched in Izuku's mind. His sacrifice was not in vain, the world survived. And now, Izuku Midoriya, the hero all-in-one, was making sure he never fell into darkness again. The wind blew gently, and in the living room of his home, Izuku sat on the sofa with Itsuka, his wife, by his side. She rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes closed in tranquility. What do you think, Izuku? She asked in her soft, direct tone. Izuku smiled, watching his daughters play in the moonlit garden. After everything we've been through, his gaze softened. I never imagined we'd have this. Her daughters, one 6 years old and the other 4, ran around happily, laughing and playing without a care in the world. They didn't know the weight of war, they didn't know how close the world had come to destruction, all they knew was that their parents loved them and that they were safe. Izuku felt a warmth in his chest. This was the future he had fought for, the world he had dreamed of building. But far from this quiet night, on the edge of reality, something was moving. The peaceful night at the Midoriya house was interrupted by the alert on the news. Izuku and Itsuka stopped watching their daughters play and focused their attention on the screen. The reporter on the broadcast spoke nervously from the central square of Musudafu. A few minutes ago, a rift in space opened in the sky above the city. What seemed like a dimensional anomaly has. The image shook as a golden and red energy illuminated the plaza. 2 figures emerged from the portal, both dressed in imposing armor, with helmets hiding their faces, but Izuku immediately recognized what he was seeing. A chill ran down his spine. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was an invasion. The news cameras focused on the 2 invaders. One of them wore a green suit with golden armor with emerald details, his cape waving majestically. The other wore a fiery red suit with golden highlights, her presence radiating absolute power. The reporter whispered in terror. We don't know who they are, but their presence is. Then the man raised his hand, the air vibrated, and with just his voice, the entire city felt his power. Citizens of this world, his tone wasn't a shout or a battle roar, it was a declaration. My name is Lord Drakkon. Izuku felt his heart stop for a moment. Next to him, Itsuka noticed his reaction and took his hand. In the broadcast, Lord Drakkon lowered his hand and continued speaking. This world has lived in ignorance for too long. His helmet reflected the city lights, his presence making the air itself feel heavy. We come from an empire beyond this reality, beyond time, beyond the limits you know. The reporter swallowed and continued recording, unable to move. The woman beside him, in the red and gold armor, finally spoke. "We have come with an offer." His voice was powerful, cold, unbreakable. "This world has been through wars, sacrifices, and still clings to a fragile system." She took a step forward. "We offer you something better." Lord Drakkon looked up at the Musudafu sky. "We offer you an empire." The live broadcast was suddenly cut off. Musudafu's quiet night had come to an end. "We offer you an empire." Those words echoed in Izuku all in one's mind as his finger pressed the central dial of his Omnitrix, the alien watch flashing with an emerald light. XLR8. In an instant, his body changed, his skin turned black and blue, his build became slimmer and more streamlined. Her eyes lit up with energy, and an electric buzz surrounded her body as time around her seemed to slow down. He was fast, faster than time itself. He turned to Itsuka and his daughters, who were looking at him with concern. "I'll be back soon." The words were firm, but Itsuka knew the situation was dangerous. She knew he would never say anything he couldn't deliver, but this time could he really promise it? Before I could answer, he had already disappeared in a flash of blue speed. In less than 3 seconds, Izuku arrived at Musudafu Square, stopped right in front of the two invaders, his gaze fixed on them, and now that he saw them up close, the feeling of unease increased. The man with the dragon helmet radiated a presence that was impossible to ignore. His posture was not that of a common villain. He was not someone impulsive or arrogant, he was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Beside him, the woman in red and gold armor showed no reaction to his arrival. She just crossed her arms and waited as if she already knew this would happen. Izuku broke the silence. "I don't know who they are, but this isn't a place to conquer." His voice was firm, ready for anything. The man turned his head towards him slowly. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, the conqueror let out a slight laugh. Not a mocking or superior laugh, a laugh of recognition. Izuku Midoriya. The way he said his name made Izuku, all in one, feel a chill. That voice was his, but distorted, deeper, more severe, colder. The eyes behind the black helmet with gold details examined him for a second longer before continuing. "Interesting." The Dragon Emperor stepped forward. "Tell me, Izuku, how many worlds do you think there are in this multiverse?" Izuku frowned. "Enough to know that not all of them are yours." The man smiled slightly. "Not yet." The woman beside him finally spoke, her tone full of authority. "We didn't come here to negotiate." Izuku put his guard up. Lord Drakkon raised his hand slowly, with the confidence of someone who had defeated thousands before. "Let's see if you're worthy of this world, Izuku Midoriya." In less than 8 seconds, Izuku had gotten all the civilians out of the area, but when he left the last civilian in a safe place and turned back towards the plaza, his heart stopped for a moment. Because, standing where he had started, Lord Drakkon was looking at him, his helmet moving beside him, following him. Izuku couldn't believe what he saw. No one could keep up with XLR8, no one had been able to react to his speed without some kind of trick. But this man was doing it naturally, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. Izuku took another step, moving a little more to the right, the reflection of Drakkon's visor following him effortlessly. The air felt thicker. The female figure of the Phoenix Ranger stood with her arms crossed, watching the scene without intervening, and that made Izuku feel even more dangerous. Lord Drakkon spoke calmly, as if Izuku's speed meant nothing. "You're fast." The tone held no surprise, it was a simple statement. Izuku gritted his teeth. "And you shouldn't be able to see me at this speed." Lord Drakkon bowed his head slightly. "Do you really think you're the fastest?" Izuku took a step back. What did he mean by that? Drakkon slowly raised his master morpher. "Tell me, Izuku Midoriya, do you think you're the only one in this multiverse who has achieved perfection?" Before Izuku could process his words, the Dragon Emperor activated his transformation. A flash of golden energy enveloped his body, the wind roared like a hurricane, and the energy around him vibrated with an intensity unknown to this world. When the light dissipated, Izuku understood the truth. He was no longer simply seeing an invader, he was seeing a being that transcended the limitations of reality, he was seeing the highest form of what he himself could have been. Drakkon took a step forward, and the ground itself seemed to sink beneath his weight. Now, his voice was deeper, more resonant, more powerful. "Show me what you're capable of." Izuku had only an instant to react before Lord Drakkon disappeared in a flash of impossible speed. For the first time in his life XLR8 was not the fastest in the fight. The air vibrated with an unbearable weight. Lord Drakkon's transformation was not like that of other warriors. It was not a simple power increase, it was an absolute evolution. In these 10 years, his connection to the Morphin grid had strengthened to unimaginable levels. The Green Drakkon Ranger form, the one he used in his fight with All for One, was no longer his maximum power. Now, it had become something more. His ranger suit had been dyed black, with red lines running down his suit. The armor had become heavier, more solid, but without restricting his movements. Behind the black and gold visor, his eyes glowed with pure Morphin grid energy. They were not human eyes, they were the eyes of a god. Izuku sensed the danger before Drakkon even moved. In his XLR8 form, he was faster, but not by much. Drakkon took a step forward and the air erupted around him. Izuku barely had time to move, his body becoming a blue blur as he dodged a blow that passed inches from his head. Although the blow didn't reach him, the shock wave did. The movement of his fist raised a current of air that shook the entire city. Izuku spun in the air and landed on the side of a building, his alien claws digging into the concrete to stabilize himself, but his mind was on high alert. If that blow had reached him, he would have died instantly. Izuku knew how to fight stronger enemies, use his speed to wear them down, attack their weak points, and win with intelligence. But here, that wasn't enough. Drakkon wasn't just strong, he was fast, not at his level but fast enough to follow him with his eyes, react to his movements and strike with the force of a cataclysm. This wasn't a common fight, it was a battle against something that shouldn't exist. Drakkon lowered his hand, as if he knew exactly what Izuku was thinking. "Do you understand now?" His voice echoed in the air like suppressed thunder. Izuku didn't respond. Izuku closed his eyes for a microsecond. He could run away, try to regroup, look for support, find a strategy, but if he did, Drakkon would destroy this city before he could do anything about it. Unable to let this dark version of himself do whatever it wanted, Izuku gritted his teeth and pressed his Omnitrix, which glowed brightly, projecting thousands of codes and data into the air, as he attempted to analyze his opponent's genetics. When he fought Shigaraki, the Omnitrix was able to identify the genetic anomalies that gave him his power and repair them, the same principle applying to any being with mutations or modifications in their DNA. If Lord Drakkon derived his strength from a quirk, then the Omnitrix could neutralize it, but when the artificial intelligence tried to scan him, the Omnitrix overheated. A series of red alerts flashed across the Omnitrix's holographic interface, the system processing millions of calculations per second, trying to identify what kind of genetic mutation gave Drakkon his power. But the only result he could come up with was undetected anomaly. No genetic alteration was found. Power comes from an unknown source. Izuku frowned as the Omnitrix emitted a low overload hum that made no sense. Even the most complex quirks were still based on genetic mutations. But the Omnitrix couldn't find any in Lord Drakkon. It was as if he didn't have a quirk at all. Lord Drakkon watched calmly as the Omnitrix overloaded. "You tried to erase something that doesn't exist." Izuku gritted his teeth. "That doesn't make sense. Where does your power come from?" Drakkon smiled slightly behind his black and gold helmet. "Of something bigger than any genetic mutation." He raised his hand slowly, golden and emerald energy flashing around him. "The Omnitrix is a technological marvel, but it's a scientific tool." His voice was calm, confident, as if he were explaining something obvious. "But I'm not a genetic mistake." The air vibrated with the intensity of his energy. "I am the will of the Morphin grid made flesh." Izuku froze. This man was not a biological anomaly or a being that could be corrected by science. Lord Drakkon was something more, a being that transcended biology. Drakkon wasn't a mistake in the universe's genetic code. Izuku closed the Omnitrix and prepared his next transformation. Because now he knew he was fighting more than just a villain, he was fighting a deity. The lights in Azimuth's lab flickered as the sound of a high-priority alert echoed off the metal walls. Azimuth, the creator of the Omnitrix and the most intelligent being in the universe, frowned as he reviewed the data appearing on his holographic screen. "This isn't normal," he murmured. Beside him, Ben Tennyson crossed his arms, watching the projection with curiosity. "Another multiversal crisis?" he asked casually. "I thought after Eon, nothing could surprise us." Azimuth ignored his comment and expanded the details. Alert. Overloading of Omnitrix. Location. Universe 696M. Affected user. Izuku Midoriya all in one. Cuz. Entity not compatible with biological analysis. Azimuth narrowed his eyes. No compatible. That didn't make sense. The Omnitrix had scanned higher dimensional beings, gods, extra-dimensional creatures, and even celestial sapiens. And yet, in that alternate universe, Izuku Midoriya's Omnitrix had overloaded trying to analyze someone. Ben raised an eyebrow. A glitch. Azimuth shook his head. The Omnitrix has no bugs. Ben grimaced. You say that because you've never had to use it at an important moment. Azimuth ignored him and continued reading the data. Before he could draw any conclusions, time in the lab distorted. A golden glow appeared in the air, forming a vortex of temporal energy. And from it, a man in a lab coat emerged. His expression, however, did not have the usual calm and confidence that he always showed. Professor Paradox was scared. Ben noticed it immediately. Paradox, what's going on? The time traveler looked at Azimuth first, then at Ben, and finally back at the Omnitrix screen. His voice, for the first time in centuries, trembled. I've been hoping this day would never come. Azimuth crossed his arms, analyzing her reaction. You're not easy to scare. Paradox closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering the right words to explain what was happening. Finally, he spoke. The chances were infinitely slim. His gaze turned serious. But still, it happened. Ben stepped forward. What happened? Paradox took a deep breath. The conqueror has arrived. The air itself seemed to weigh more with those words. Ben frowned. Another conquistador. Come on, how bad can it be? Paradox closed his eyes and muttered. More than you think, Ben. Much more. When he opened his eyes again, his expression left no room for doubt. His name is Lord Drakkon. The data on the screen flashed with alarming intensity. And if we don't do something soon, there won't be a universe left to save. Ben looked at Paradox in disbelief. Are you telling me that this guy, Lord Drakkon, is more dangerous than Eon or the Celestial Sapiens? Paradox exhaled slowly, his gaze grim. Ben, not even Celestial Sapiens can understand what the Morphin Grid really is. Azimuth raised an eyebrow, interested. Explain yourself. Paradox nodded and raised his hand, projecting a holographic image into the air. Before the multiverse existed, before the Celestial Sapiens shaped realities, before the Anodites and the Chronosapiens had control over cosmic energy. The image showed a field of golden, shifting energy, an infinite web of light that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The Morphin Grid already existed. Ben crossed his arms. I've never heard of that. Paradox smiled slightly. Very few beings in the multiverse know this. The image changed, showing multiple generations of warriors in colorful armor. Throughout history, hundreds of thousands of warriors have used the power of the Morphin Grid to protect their universes. Ben frowned. Are you talking about Power Rangers? Paradox nodded. Don't underestimate them, Ben. Each of them had access to a power that transcended reality itself. The image changed again. A man was seen with white and green armor, with a dark aura surrounding him. But more than 200 years ago, one man attempted the unthinkable. Ben leaned forward. Let me guess. Lord Drakkon, Azimuth completed. Paradox nodded. A fallen warrior who, in his obsession with supremacy, discovered how to manipulate the Morphin Grid to his will. The image showed how Drakkon massacred Rangers from different realities, stealing their power. Drakkon nearly ruled the multiverse. The image showed a final battle, a group of surviving Rangers uniting their power to seal it. In the end, he was defeated. Ben nodded with a confident smile. So the story ends with the heroes winning, as always. Paradox shook his head, his expression even more serious. That's what we all believed. The image changed again, now showing a green-haired boy, desperate and hurt. Izuku Midoriya. Ben tensed. Wait, Izuku. Paradox closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with an expression of utter regret. And Izuku Midoriya from a different reality found Drakkon's prison. The image showed how Drakkon and that Izuku merged in an explosion of green and gold energy. And together they created something new. Ben felt a chill run down his spine. A new Lord Drakkon. Paradox nodded slightly. One with the conviction of Izuku Midoriya and the ambition of Drakkon. Ben crossed his arms. Okay, but if they sealed it before, we can do it again. Azimuth interrupted, his gaze fixed on the data. It's not that simple. Paradox continued. The fusion with Izuku changed Drakkon, and his connection to the Morphin Grid now flows through him at will. He turned to look at both of them. Ben crossed his arms, his face reflecting a mixture of disbelief and concern. So, you're telling me the Morphin Grid isn't being controlled by Drakkon? That it's now voluntarily flowing through him? Paradox nodded, his expression grave. Exactly. Azimuth, who until now had remained in deep analysis of the information, finally spoke. That doesn't make sense. Paradox looked at him calmly. Why not? Azimuth zoomed in on the holographic projection of the Morphin Grid, showing its vast energetic structure stretching across the multiverse. The Morphin Grid is a cosmic energy source. It's like an interdimensional frequency that the Power Rangers have always used through specific morphers, but it's never had a will of its own. Paradox bowed his head slightly. Never. Azimuth was silent for a moment. Ben raised an eyebrow. What are you implying? Paradox exhaled and looked at the Morphin Grid projection. We've always assumed the Morphin Grid is simply a power source, but what if it's actually something more? The time traveler turned his head towards Ben. Tell me, Ben, what defines each version of Izuku Midoriya in the multiverse? Ben frowned. Well, they all have the same conviction. No matter the difference in their stories, they always want to be heroes, they always want to save the weak. Paradox smiled sadly. Exactly. Ben tensed. Wait, are you saying that the Morphin Grid recognizes that conviction? Paradox nodded. Yeah, the projection changed, showing Izuku Midoriya's fusion with Drakkon. Drakkon's connection to the Morphin Grid is no longer an act of submission. With Izuku Midoriya's conviction, the Morphin Grid flows voluntarily through him. Ben opened his eyes in surprise. How the hell is this possible? Paradox crossed his arms. Because the Morphin Grid recognizes him as someone just, someone with a noble cause. Ben laughed humorlessly. Fair, noble. He turned and pointed at the image of the Sentinel Rangers and Drakkon's army marching through conquered universes. That guy is conquering entire realities. Paradox nodded slowly. Because he believes with every fiber of his being that he is saving the oppressed. Azimuth closed his eyes, understanding the magnitude of what was happening. That means we can't just disable its connection to the Morphin Grid. Paradox looked at Azimuth seriously. No, because the Morphin Grid has validated their cause. The laboratory fell completely silent. Now they understood the true gravity of the situation. Lord Drakkon was not simply a conqueror with unstoppable power. He was a man who believed with absolute certainty that he was doing the right thing, and worst of all, the power of the Morphin Grid was on his side. Ben gritted his teeth. So, how do we stop him? Paradox looked at Ben with a grim expression. I really don't know. The words echoed around the room. Ben crossed his arms, his jaw clenched in frustration. No, I don't accept that. His voice was firm, refusing to accept the idea that Drakkon could not be defeated. There's always a way, there always has been. Paradox closed his eyes, as if hoping Ben was right, but when he opened them again, his expression was still grim. Not this time. Ben took a step towards him, pointing at him. You're Paradox. You've seen every timeline, every possibility. Are you telling me there isn't a single one where we can beat him? When Drakkon tried to conquer the multiverse 200 years ago, the Rangers stopped him. He paused, but they were only able to do so because his closest followers betrayed him. Ben frowned. So what about that? Paradox looked at him directly. That's not going to happen anymore. The holographic images changed, showing images of Melissa Shield, the Phoenix Empress, with her army of Sentinel Rangers and the Drakkon Empire marching through the multiverse. Drakkon isn't alone this time. Melissa's hologram glowed with power, leading her troops with absolute devotion. Melissa Shield and her entire empire believe in him. Ben opened his mouth, but found no words. Paradox continued. There are no more Power Rangers, the technology to create the morphers was lost along with them. The hologram changed, showing the destruction of the last Ranger bases in history, technology lost in the vastness of time. And without them, there's no one who can stand up to him on equal terms. Ben clenched his fists. Then we'll face him with what we've got. I'm not going to stand idly by while he conquers entire realities." Paradox sighed, with a sadness he had never shown before. "Ben." For the first time, his words were uncertain. "I don't know how to face this enemy." Silence filled the room. Ben froze. Paradox never said that, never. He always had an answer. He knew what to do, not even he had a solution. Paradox looked at the images of Drakkon's army once more. Most likely. He closed his eyes. It's that Izuku's universe is already doomed. Ben took a step back, feeling the weight of those words. "No, the only thing we can do is warn others." The hologram showed multiple parallel universes. Because if Drakkon doesn't find resistance in this universe, he'll go after the others. The lab felt colder than ever. Ben looked at Azimuth, waiting for an answer, a solution, but the little genius just closed his eyes and remained silent. A green flash illuminated Azimuth's lab, interrupting the somber conversation between Ben, Paradox, and the genius Galvan. The air vibrated with an energy unlike anything they had ever felt before. In the center of the glow, the figure of Loki emerged. His emerald cloak flowed lightly, his expression was serene but serious, and his eyes shone with a knowledge that transcended reality. Paradox tilted his head in surprise. "Well, that is unexpected." Loki smiled wryly. "It's a pleasure to see you, Paradox. Always so punctual." Ben tensed. What are you doing here?" Loki sighed and walked slowly towards the multiverse projection in the lab. "I'm not the same Loki you remember, Ben Tennyson." Ben crossed his arms skeptically. "That's what all the locusts say." Azimuth interrupted, analyzing the energy around him. "He's not just a Loki, his presence affects the very foundations of the multiverse." Loki looked at the genius Galvan and smiled in recognition. "Always so perceptive, Azimuth." Paradox stepped forward. "Have you come to warn us about Drakkon?" Loki shook his head. "No." His expression became more serious. "I came to tell you that it's too late." Ben's eyes widened in surprise. "That?" Loki reached out and projected his own vision of the multiverse. The golden threads of Yggdrasil, which had previously seemed fragile and disordered, were now solid, stable, unbreakable. Paradox looked at him in disbelief. "How is that possible?" Loki smiled melancholy. "Because Drakkon has already changed the multiverse." Loki raised his hand, and images projected how the morphin grid flowed through every existing reality. "For 10 years, I watched as the morphin grid actively sustained Yggdrasil again." Paradox frowned. "Impossible." The morphin grid had ceased to be the stabilizing force of the multiverse. Loki nodded. "I know." Ben narrowed his eyes. "So what changed?" Loki slowly turned towards him. Drakkon, his presence, his conviction, made the morphin grid stabilize Yggdrasil. The holograms showed how the morphin grid was no longer simply an interdimensional energy source, but a structural pillar of the multiverse. Paradox shook his head, unable to believe it. "Are you saying the multiverse now depends on Drakkon's existence?" Loki closed his eyes and nodded slowly. "Yeah." Azimuth intervened, his tone cold and analytical. "That means if we defeat him, the multiverse will collapse." Loki opened his eyes, looking directly at him. "Exactly what I came to tell you." Ben took a step back, feeling a chill run through his body. "No. It can't be." Loki took a deep breath. "So, for the first time in decades, I'm no longer trapped on the throne of Yggdrasil." Ben blinked, stunned. "Because you're no longer needed to keep it stable." Loki nodded. "Drakkon has taken my place and he doesn't need to be trapped on the throne of Yggdrasil." The laboratory fell into complete silence, each person assimilating the new reality. Drakkon was not just a conqueror, he had become the axis around which the multiverse revolved. Ben clenched his fists. "So what do we do?" Loki looked at him calmly. "You have 2 options." He raised a single finger. "They accept reality. Drakkon rules, but the multiverse is stable. No one else suffers the collapse, no one else is devoured by chaos." Ben growled. "And the second option?" Loki lowered his hand. "They try to stop him and risk destroying everything." Azimuth closed his eyes in deep thought. Paradox crossed his arms, his face serious, and Ben gritted his teeth. "Those can't be our only options." Loki looked at him with a mixture of understanding and regret. "I'm sorry, Ben, but Lord Drakkon isn't just a conqueror now." His eyes shone brightly. "He is the balance. You knew about this for 10 years and never told us. His voice echoed with suppressed fury. Loki laughed ironically, with a smile that reflected not joy, but bitterness. How could I do it? He turned and spread his arms, as if showing the absurdity of the question. I was trapped on the throne of Yggdrasil, precariously holding the multiverse with all my will. The smile faded, leaving only a tired expression. Paradox never visited me even once. Paradox tensed. Ben turned to him with an accusing look. It's true. Paradox looked down for a moment, then sighed and nodded slowly. I couldn't. Ben frowned. Because. Paradox looked at him seriously. Because if he interfered too much with Loki, Yggdrasil would have collapsed. Ben fell silent, absorbing the gravity of his words, but Loki wasn't finished. And what about the Celestial Sapiens? He continued, with a mocking smile. They, the gods of the multiverse, the supreme beings who can fix everything. Loki snapped his fingers sarcastically. Where were they? Ben gritted his teeth. They were probably. Loki interrupted him with a sharp look. Debating. Ben exhaled sharply. Are you telling me that, all this time, the Celestial Sapiens were just arguing? Loki nodded slowly, happy with the way things are going, without lifting a single finger. Loki crossed his arms and looked directly at Paradox. And you? Paradox didn't move. You, the great time traveler, who always has a plan, did nothing either. Paradox took a deep breath and spoke in a calm voice. I knew that any interference with the balance could be worse. Loki laughed humorlessly. So you just watched. He turned and looked at Asmith. And you? Asmith looked at him with his usual expression of analytical calm. My duty is to science, not to the games of the gods. Loki bowed his head slightly. A very Galvan response. His gaze returned to Ben. And you, hero of the earth? Ben tensed. I didn't know anything about this. Loki watched him for a moment and then nodded. Exact. His tone became serious. Because nobody cared until Drakkon showed up. Ben was speechless. He knew that, deep down, Loki was right. For a decade, the multiverse was on the brink of collapse. Loki held Yggdrasil with his own existence and no one did anything. And now that Lord Drakkon had suddenly stabilized everything, everyone was worried. Loki turned to the image of the morphin grid enveloping the multiverse. I'm no longer trapped on the throne. His eyes shone with power. Because Drakkon already takes my place. He turned to Ben, Paradox and Asmith. So tell me, he took a step forward. Do you really want to destroy the only order that holds this multiverse together? Ben remained silent, his fists clenched. Paradox looked on with a frown, for the first time without a clear answer, and Asmith analyzed the data on his computer, assimilating the information. Loki continued his explanation, his voice filled with the gravity of a god who had seen the collapse of reality itself. When the first Lord Drakkon was sealed, the morphin grid was devastated. Ben frowned. How can a power source be so important to the multiverse? Loki turned his head towards him, his expression one of disbelief. Do you still think the morphin grid was just a power source for the Power Rangers? Ben fell silent and Paradox closed his eyes. The morphin grid is more than just a power, it is the structural basis of the multiverse. Loki nodded slowly. Exactly. With a snap of his fingers, he projected a holographic image of the multiverse before Drakkon's fall. For centuries, the morphin grid kept realities separate but connected, functioning as the nervous system of the multiverse. The image changed, showing the moment when Lord Drakkon was sealed by the last Power Rangers. But when he was defeated and sealed, the morphin grid was weakened and its connection to the multiverse was broken. The image showed entire realities colliding, timelines fragmenting and destroying each other. Ben took a step back. All this because they sealed Drakkon. Loki nodded. Without the morphin grid to stabilize it, the multiverse began to collapse. Realities collided, wiping countless souls from existence. Paradox closed his eyes. And this is where AVT and He Who Remains come in. Loki turned to him and smiled slightly. Indeed, my timeless friend. With another wave of his hand, the image shifted to the sacred timeline, the only stable reality that He Who Abides had created. In their desperation to avoid total collapse, the TVA and He Who Remains attempted to maintain order with the sacred timeline. Ben gritted his teeth, all to prevent the multiverse from fragmenting again. Loki nodded. But even that was only a temporary solution. The footage showed the fall of He Who Remains, the birth of the true multiverse, and Loki trapped on the throne of Yggdrasil. When the AVT collapsed and the sacred timeline broke, someone had to hold it up. Loki looked at Ben directly. So it was me. Ben took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that truth. You spent decades trapped there. Loki nodded slowly. Every second, every breath, was holding Yggdrasil with my very existence. He turned his gaze to Paradox. No one came to help. Paradox looked down, silent. Loki continued. But then, 10 years ago, something changed, the birth of a new Lord Drakkon. The footage showed how the morphin grid began to flow through him, restoring his power and consequently stabilizing the multiverse. Loki closed his eyes for a moment before speaking. And now, thanks to him, I'm no longer trapped. Ben frowned. But at what cost? Loki looked at him calmly. At what cost, you say? He took a step forward. Dime, Ben. Loki's eyes flashed with power. If you could save the entire multiverse, ensure it never collapses, bring stability to all worlds, but you had to kneel before Lord Drakkon, would you do it? Ben was speechless, but Loki didn't let him recover from his words. They lost because it was easier to ignore what was already wrong, and now that someone else has fixed it, they don't like that it wasn't on their terms. Ben clenched his fists. You can't tell me that kneeling before Drakkon is the only option. Loki gave a slight smile. It's not an option, Ben. His eyes shone brightly. It's reality. Without hesitation, he raised his arm and activated his morpher. A golden flash enveloped his body, and in an instant, his ranger suit appeared over him. His armor was golden with black and green details, the morphin grid mark glowing on his chest. The golden helmet with the symbol of Loki's horns reflected the light from the laboratory. Loki had already chosen his side. Ben took a step back, his expression full of disbelief. You joined him. Loki nodded with complete confidence. Because Drakkon isn't the enemy, Ben. He turned his gaze towards Paradox and Azimuth. I'm not here to fight with you. His voice was calm, but firm. I'm here to give you the chance to save more people. The image of the multiverse continued to float in the air. Drakkon has stabilized existence itself. He turned to Ben. But his vision doesn't end here. The image changed, showing new portals opening into different realities. There are still countless universes on the brink of collapse, abandoned to their fate, ignored by the celestial sapiens and the so-called protectors of the multiverse. He pointed a finger at Ben. You know what it's like. You've seen worlds destroyed, you've seen civilizations fall. Ben gritted his teeth. Yes, and I fight to save them. Loki nodded. So tell me, Ben Tennyson. The morphin grid vibrated around him, giving him a divine presence. How many more worlds will you let fall just because you don't like who rules them? Ben remained silent. Paradox looked at Azimuth, waiting for his reaction. Azimuth, the most intelligent being in the universe, remained motionless and finally, spoke in a calm voice. If what you say is true, then the stability of existence depends on Lord Drakkon continuing his reign. Loki nodded. Yes, and if they wanted to do something, they should have done it before we got to this point. Ben closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. I can't accept that. He opened his eyes and looked at Loki. Drakkon may have brought stability, but he did so under his own system, eliminating all resistance. Loki watched him silently and Ben took a step forward. And if we let him continue, the entire multiverse will be his. Loki tilted his head. And what's wrong with that? Ben froze for a moment. Loki smiled calmly. Look at it another way. If Drakkon has already proven that his system works. His tone became hypnotic, convincing. If your empire has brought peace to your universe, if you have achieved what no other being could. He took a step forward. Why stop him? Paradox closed his eyes. Because if we do, there will be no one who can challenge him. Loki laughed softly. People only fear order when they are not the ones who establish it. Ben glared at him. If you think we're going to join Drakkon, you're wrong. Loki lowered his arms and sighed. I imagined it. His gaze darkened. But the invitation still stands. The golden glow of his armor intensified. I hope that when the time comes, they won't be too much of a nuisance. Before Ben could respond, Loki disappeared in a flash of golden light. The lab went completely silent, Ben took a deep breath and banged the table in frustration. Damn. Paradox crossed his arms. Now we have a bigger problem. Azimuth turned the holographic image of the multiverse. Drakkon is no longer just a threat, he now has allies he never had before. Paradox nodded slowly, and the worst part is that now, for the first time, he's not the one who's alone. Ben closed his eyes, because he knew what that meant. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. The air vibrated with the energy of the Omnitrix's transformation. Izuku Midoriya, the hero all-in-one, left behind his XLR8 form and emerged as a completely different being. His body was covered with the metallic and golden armor of clockwork, the alien with absolute power over time. If Drakkon was almost as fast as XLR8, then the answer was simple, not letting him move or react or even a chance to resist by freezing time. Izuku raised his arm and activated his ability. Reality itself stopped, the colors became duller, the sound disappeared and the world became completely still. Nothing and no one should be able to move in this state. Izuku took a deep breath and raised his arm, charging a temporal beam with the power to return Lord Drakkon to his timeline. This was his ace up his sleeve. If he couldn't defeat him in combat, then he would remove him from this universe. Without giving him another chance, he fired, the beam crossing the air towards his target. But then the impossible happened. Lord Drakkon moved, and time stopped. Izuku felt a chill run through his metallic body. This was not possible. Not even celestial sapiens could move in a completely frozen state of time, but Drakkon did, and not only that, he caught the lightning bolt with his hand. He held it with absolute calm, as if it were a simple harmless object. Izuku couldn't believe what he was seeing. Drakkon slowly turned his head towards him, his visor reflecting the golden energy of the temporal ray. Did you really think time could stop me? Izuku instinctively took a step back. No. It's not possible. Drakkon closed his fist, the time beam dissipating into golden particles. Izuku tried to move, but in that instant, Lord Drakkon was already in front of him. A single punch launched him through the still air, shattering time itself with the force of the impact. Izuku fell violently, passing through buildings frozen in time before finally stopping. I wasn't fighting a normal being. I wasn't even fighting a being from this universe. I was fighting something that existed beyond logic. Lord Drakkon raised his hand, flexing his fingers as he calmly regarded clockwork. Time is irrelevant to the Morphin grid. His voice was confident, unwavering. You can't banish me because I'm all over the multiverse, and even if you did, nothing would stop me from returning. Drakkon raised his arm and time began to move again. Color returned to the world. Sound returned in a deafening roar. Izuku stood, feeling like his only advantage had been destroyed in seconds. Lord Drakkon took a step toward him. If this is the level of power that the Izuku of this world has. He closed his fist, golden and emerald energy crackling around him. Then you've already lost. Izuku gritted his teeth and activated the Omnitrix again. If clockwork didn't work, then he would need something even stronger. His Omnitrix vibrated with an intensity he hadn't felt in years. Izuku knew he was risking everything by using this form. Alien X was not a power to be taken lightly, and it had been too long since he last used it, and with good reason. The last time he became Alien X, he tried to do the impossible. He attempted to reverse the damage from the war against All for One and resurrect the dead, but Bellicus and Serena stopped him. Not because he couldn't do it, but because reviving the dead from his universe would only have created a reflection, not the true ones. In his universe, Ben Tennyson had done the same thing, and all he managed to do was create an exact copy of his destroyed universe, but it wasn't the same. Only Ben and the Celestial Sapiens knew the difference. It was the burden they had to carry. His Omnitrix exploded in a black and white glow. His body changed. He was now Alien X. Reality trembled with his presence. The sky fragmented like broken glass, unable to contain his existence. The foundations of the city creaked, as if the universe itself felt the weight of his power. Within the void of his own consciousness, two presences awaited him. Serena, the voice of love and compassion, looked at him calmly, but with a shadow of sadness on her face, and Bellicus, the voice of reason and destruction, looked at him with a frown, impatient. You've got some guts coming back here, Izuku Midoriya, Bellicus growled. We were wondering if you'd need our power again, Serena added, her tone softer, but just as commanding. Izuku took a deep breath. I'm not here to debate. Serena tilted her head. And what do you expect us to do? Give you control without question? Izuku gritted his teeth. I have no other choice. Bellicus's eyes flashed with fury. You always have a choice. But you've already decided what you're going to do, right? Izuku closed his eyes. If I don't fight now, my universe will be destroyed. Serena looked at Bellicus, who just grunted. HMPH, okay. Izuku blinked, surprised. That's all. Serena smiled slightly. We're not going to waste time arguing when existence is in danger. Izuku felt a huge weight disappear from his back. For the first time in a long time, the three of them were in agreement, and that meant he had full access to the power of Alien X. Lord Drakkon felt the change immediately. It wasn't just power or strength, it was something deeper. For the first time in years he was impressed. He could feel his heart pounding with adrenaline. This wasn't just an opponent, this was a real challenge. His vision sharpened, his blood boiled with anticipation, and he smiled beneath his black and gold helmet. At last, his aura exploded in a golden and green glow, the morphin grid resonating around him. A worthy opponent, our battle will be legendary. Izuku, in his Alien X form, looked up, and without saying a single word they both launched themselves at each other. The entire universe felt the collision, the sky shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the battle had risen beyond the limits of the earth. The impact of their blows had shattered the atmosphere, lifting them into the void of space, the stars flickering as silent witnesses to the fight between two divine entities. Izuku, in his Alien X form, fought with an intensity he had never achieved before, each blow shaking the fabric of reality. But there was a problem. Even though Alien X had infinite power, Drakkon had something else, absolute mastery. Their blows collided in perfect sync, each one nullifying the impact of the other, but little by little, Drakkon began to take the advantage. Izuku felt it. Drakkon's every move was calculated. Every block, every dodge, every counterattack was designed to expose his weak points. Alien X was omnipotent, but he wasn't a master of hand-to-hand combat, while Izuku, Drakkon, was, thanks to his fusion with Tommy Oliver and his connection to the morphin grid. Not only had he perfected multiple fighting styles, he had transcended them. Even Alien X, for all its power, had flaws, and Drakkon was exploiting them. Izuku threw a punch with the strength to destroy an entire galaxy. Drakkon blocked it with one hand. Izuku fired an energy blast capable of erasing time itself. Drakkon twisted his body and dodged it with the precision of a surgeon, and in the blink of an eye Drakkon appeared in front of him. Izuku tried to react, but it was too late. A single blow to the center of his chest sent him back hundreds of kilometers into the void. Izuku felt something that shouldn't be possible in this form: pain. Alien X was invulnerable. Nothing should have been able to harm him, and yet Drakkon did. Drakkon lowered his hand, regarding Alien X with a mixture of respect and superiority. You don't fight badly, his voice echoed in the emptiness of space. But power without control is useless. Izuku steadied himself, his mind working at full speed, while Serena and Bellicus were also in shock. This isn't possible, Serena whispered. Alien X is absolute. Bellicus could barely process what was happening. Izuku clenched his fists. He wasn't going to accept defeat, but Drakkon already knew it. His presence intensified, the morphin grid flowing in all its splendor. You are a god of your universe, Izuku, but I am the emperor of the multiverse. Drakkon raised both hands. The void of space lit up with a golden and emerald aura. And now, I'm going to show you what supremacy really means. Drakkon moved faster than Alien X could process. Before Izuku could react, a brutal knee slammed into his abdomen. The impact was not only physical but cosmic. For an instant, the morphin grid and the power of Alien X synchronized. Izuku felt something impossible. Serena and Bellicus felt it too. They saw what Lord Drakkon was really planning. The feedback of information hit their minds like an endless torrent of knowledge. Izuku saw images of entire worlds falling under Drakkon's banner. He saw universes he had never known, some similar to his own, some completely different, versions of himself, of Ben Tennyson, of heroes who in his reality were legends and fiction, all defeated and consumed by the Drakkon Empire. He saw armies of Sentinel Rangers marching across dimensions, their warships built with advanced technology and powered by the morphin grid, capable of obliterating planets with a single shot. And at the center of it all, Lord Drakkon on his throne, watching his work with absolute calm. Serena spoke first. This isn't just domination. Bellicus continued, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and respect. It is absolute order. Izuku gritted his teeth, feeling the vision tear at his mind. Drakkon wasn't exaggerating when he called himself Emperor of the Multiverse. It wasn't arrogance or madness, it was a fact. Drakkon hadn't come just for his world. He had come for the entire multiverse, and the worst part was that he was succeeding. Izuku snapped back to reality when Drakkon raised his hand, his energy vibrating with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Now you understand, right? I don't conquer out of ambition. He raised his fist wrapped in the power of the Morphin Grid. I'm doing it because no one else has the courage to do it. The multiverse was on the verge of collapse, and no one did anything. Drakkon pointed at Izuku. Not you, not Paradox, not the Celestial Sapiens, just me. Izuku stood up, feeling the weight of truth on his shoulders, but there was something else. Izuku Midoriya, Alien X, smiled. Drakkon frowned. What are you laughing at? Izuku raised his head, his power shining with even greater intensity. Because you made a mistake. Drakkon narrowed his eyes. Which? Izuku clenched his fists. You showed me how to stop you. And in that instant the power of Alien X shook reality itself. The stars distorted, time frayed like a broken rope, and the laws of the universe were torn from their course. If he could not defeat Drakkon, then he would erase him from existence. The energy of Alien X expanded. Everything began to disappear. The planets, the stars, the emptiness of space. Everything was reduced to a blank canvas. The entire multiverse would be rewritten. Izuku was ready to start over. Because if that was the only way to prevent Drakkon's victory, then he would take it. Bellicus and Serena watched in horror. Izuku, stop, Serena yelled. You can't do this. You can't play with existence, Bellicus roared. Izuku didn't listen to them. He only had one goal in mind, to stop Lord Drakkon, no matter the cost, even if the cost was everything. But just as Alien X's power spread became unstoppable, Drakkon moved, with a stomp, the Morphin Grid exploding around him in a golden flash, the impact breaking Alien X's energy flow in an instant. Reality stopped collapsing, time stopped being rewritten, and suddenly they were back in Musutafu Square. The civilians watched in terror, unable to comprehend what had happened. For them, the battle had never left the square. They were unaware that reality itself had been on the verge of restarting. Izuku fell to his knees. Alien X had never been stopped like that, never, but Drakkon did it with chilling ease. Lord Drakkon looked down at Izuku, his helmet reflecting the city lights. His voice was calm, but relentless. Was that your plan? To erase everything? Izuku raised his head. His voice was a mix of the voices of the three consciousnesses of Alien X. It was the only way to stop you. Drakkon shook his head in disappointment. How pathetic. Izuku gritted his teeth. Drakkon raised his hand, pointing at the sky. You are a celestial sapien. A god among mortals. He slowly lowered his hand, pointing at Izuku. And your only solution was to destroy everything because you couldn't beat me. Izuku was speechless. Drakkon was right, as he crossed his arms, watching him with the calm of a predator who has already secured his victory. You don't understand what the weight of your power means. Izuku tried to get up, but his body trembled and his consciousness was dragged into the abyss of stars that was Alien X's mind. In front of him floated the faces of Bellicus and Serena, their looks of disappointment and anger. Serena looked horrified, her face reflecting infinite sadness, while Bellicus did not hide his fury. You're an idiot, Izuku Midoriya. His voice echoed in the void, like thunder crashing into eternity. Izuku closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his mistake. He knew what it meant to use Alien X to erase existence and rewrite it. He couldn't bring the dead back. He could only create exact copies, but not the real ones. Just an illusion of restoration, and yet she tried to do it anyway. Serena spoke with a shaky voice. At what point did you think this was right? Izuku couldn't answer. Did you really think destroying everything was the only solution? Izuku clenched his fists. Drakkon is conquering the multiverse. I couldn't let him win. Bellicus growled in fury. And your solution was to erase the entire existence? His energy vibrated with a terrifying intensity. Not even Lord Drakkon, with all his cruelty, would resort to something so extreme. Izuku tensed. Serena interrupted him gently, but her tone was stern. Drakkon imposes his will, but he does not destroy reality. Her face tilted towards him with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. He gives a new purpose to what already exists. Izuku shuddered. Serena and Bellicus were right. Drakkon never tried to erase the multiverse, never tried to rewrite existence, he simply took it and molded it to his will. Izuku fell to his knees in the vastness of the void. Her own words choked in her throat, realizing how far she had gone in her despair. Serena sighed, looking at him with pity. Izuku, you've proven that you're no better than Drakkon. The words hit his heart harder than any physical blow. Bellicus clicked his tongue. No, it's worse, at least Drakkon believes in something. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. Serena looked away, unable to bear to look at him any longer, and Bellicus slowly shook his head, his voice filled with bitter contempt. You are not worthy of this power. Izuku tried to say something, to justify himself, to defend himself, but there was nothing he could say, there was no excuse for what he tried to do. Serena whispered sadly, "You were different, we believed in you." His voice trembled. But we were wrong. Izuku tried to reach out his hand, but at that instant, a green glow enveloped him and the connection with Alien X was broken. Izuku panted heavily, his body returned to normal, the Omnitrix on his wrist flashed red, deactivated and without access to any transformation. Even so he staggered, trying to get up, he couldn't lose here, he couldn't give up. But then he heard his own voice on the city's screens, turned around, and felt his body freeze, on every giant screen, on every phone, on every device connected to the network. Melissa had hacked into all the feeds and was showing the exact moment she tried to use Alien X's power to force her victory. The whole world was watching. Serena and Bellicus's words echoed throughout every corner of the city. Izuku, détente. You can't do this, you can't play with existence. The silence in Musutafu Square became suffocating. Izuku looked around, seeing the faces of the civilians who had previously been afraid of Lord Drakkon, now looking at him in horror. Now they knew the truth, they understood what he was willing to do, he would have killed them all, even them. Melissa appeared on one of the broadcasts, looking directly into the camera with an expression of absolute authority. This is the hero they trusted, the man who, when he couldn't win, decided to destroy them all. Izuku felt his heart sink. Melissa looked at him with absolute coldness. Tell me, Izuku, is this what a hero does? Izuku couldn't answer, he didn't have an answer. Drakkon turned slightly towards him. I may be many things, Izuku. Drakkon stepped forward, his presence overshadowing everything else. I may be cruel. Another step, his golden aura glowing with the energy of the Morphin grid. I can be ruthless. A third step, Musutafu Square trembled under his advance. But I would never take the choice away from others. Lord Drakkon had conquered worlds, yes. He had crushed his enemies, yes. But he always gave them the option to fight, the chance to resist, while Izuku didn't. If they want to oppose the Empire, they are free to do so. Drakkon raised his fist, and they will be crushed. He opened his hand slowly. But it will be by their own choice. You, on the other hand, don't even let them choose. Drakkon closed his fist in the air, the sky opened, the portal that Drakkon and the Phoenix Empress had come through expanded, from the other side his army marched forward. Thousands of Sentinel Rangers and people with quirks who swore loyalty to Drakkon. The buildings shook under the presence of the greatest conquering force this world had ever seen. Izuku clenched his fists in despair, he couldn't accept this, he couldn't allow Drakkon to twist the truth to justify his empire. That's no choice, he shouted, his desperate voice echoing in the plaza. Fighting and dying or living under your empire is not a choice, Drakkon, it's oppression. Drakkon and Melissa looked at him without even blinking, it was Melissa who answered first. That was the same choice that heroic society gave us in our world, quirkless people like us only had two paths. His eyes shone with a cold, contained anger. Accept our existence as less than nothing or fight. He gestured around the city. We fight. Izuku tried to retort, but Melissa wasn't finished. And guess what, Izuku? We won. Izuku felt his stomach sink. He had no answer for that. Then Drakkon spoke, his voice was calm, but each word was a sword burying itself in his heart. And yet, he brought his hands to his helmet, slowly removing it. That's still more choice than my mother was given. Drakkon took off his helmet, the world held its breath, Izuku too, now seeing him with his own eyes, the same freckles reflected on his face. Lord Drakkon and Izuku Midoriya were one and the same, not just an alternate version, the version that didn't just dream of changing the world, he did it. Izuku felt a chill run through his body as Drakkon slowly raised his hand, the morphin grid vibrating in response, reality itself trembling around him. His voice held no hatred, only absolute certainty. Do you think celestial sapiens are the only ones who can rewrite reality? Drakkon snapped his fingers, the sky shattered like glass, the stars distorted, changing places in a single instant, the universe itself obeyed his will. Izuku felt his breath catch in his throat, it couldn't be possible. Drakkon raised his other hand. With a single movement, I can make entire realities disappear. Her fingers closed in the air and a star on the horizon went out, gone, erased from existence, without effort or resistance. Izuku took a step back, his mind working desperately to find an explanation. Drakkon extended his open hand once more. And with another movement, the star returned, exactly as it was before, as if it had never left. Izuku staggered. This power was meaningless. Drakkon slowly lowered his hand. But I don't. His voice became firmer. Because I give everyone the opportunity to choose. Izuku looked at Drakkon with a mixture of disbelief and fear. Now he understood that he could have erased his world in a single blink, rewritten history as he wished, but he didn't. He allowed people to make their own decisions, and in his vision, they chose to kneel, they chose to unite. Izuku didn't know what to say. He was questioning if he had ever understood what absolute power meant. Drakkon stepped forward, his shadow covering Izuku, his golden eyes shining with overwhelming intensity. I'm not just a version of you. He bowed slightly, his presence overwhelming. I am what you always should have been. The revelation of Drakkon's impossible power had reduced Izuku to silence, but it was Melissa's shield who broke the tension with calculated calm. His voice was not arrogant, nor cruel, it was firm, sure, unwavering. We don't expect them to kneel just out of fear. On every screen, in every city, the Drakkon Empire was revealed in its entirety, great metropolises rising above what were once the remnants of a fractured society. Cities where there was no inequality between quirkless, mutants, or those with quirks considered dangerous, where the hierarchy was not based on privileges of birth, but on merit and contribution, where there were no heroes or villains, only citizens of the empire. The images showed entire planets terraformed, civilizations advancing together under a single banner. They had not only conquered Earth, they had conquered the stars. The broadcast not only showcased the architecture and sprawl, but also the voices of those who lived under Drakkon's banner. The Sentinel Rangers, each of them quirkless in a world that had discarded them, were now the guardians of the future. Mutants and those with dangerous quirks talked about how, for the first time in history, they were not discriminated against for their differences. The Island scientists, working without restrictions, without fear of their knowledge being manipulated by corrupt governments or private interests. The explorers of the Empire, traveling across the multiverse in search of more realities to save, not to destroy them, but to unite them. The pictures didn't lie. This was an empire, but it was one that worked. Melissa looked directly into the camera, her expression stern but full of purpose. Your old world was based on a lie. The corruption of the Hero Commission was exposed, the atrocities they committed in the name of order, the massacres, the exploitation of the quirkless, the systematic abuse of society. Melissa closed her eyes for a moment, before speaking again. We put an end to that lie. Melissa turned to Izuku, who was still on his knees. You talked about freedom, Izuku. But you tried to destroy reality when you couldn't win. Drakkon crossed his arms, his gaze serene. We offer something better. Melissa stepped forward, the light from her armor reflecting off the screens. Prosperity. He turned to the cameras, speaking to the entire world. You can resist this, you can fight and fall, or you can accept the truth. The Drakkon Empire is not just a conquest, it is the future. With a simple command, he linked the communicators of the entire Drakkon army to the global broadcast. These were not prepared speeches or words forced by fear. They were the voices of the soldiers, of the Sentinel Rangers, of the citizens of the Empire, the true witnesses of change. Before Drakkon, I spent 30 years without anyone looking me in the eye just because I was born without a quirk. Now, I protect my world as a Sentinel Ranger. For the first time in my life, I am someone. I'm a mutant. In the old world, they only saw my appearance and called me a monster. Now, I'm an engineer on an island, working toward a future where no one else goes through what I went through. My quirk made me dangerous to everyone around me. The heroes told me it was best if I isolated myself from the world. Drakkon taught me to control it, to use it to protect instead of flee. The voices kept coming, from every corner of the empire. Men and women who would never have had a chance before, children who would have grown up believing they would never be enough, were now part of something bigger, not out of fear or oppression, but by choice. Melissa looked at Izuku directly, her expression stern but without hatred. Do you hear that, Izuku? The voices kept coming, thousands, millions, each with a story of suffering and redemption. They were not an army of fear nor slaves without will. They were people who had been discarded by the previous world, who for the first time in their lives were something more than dregs of society. Drakkon took a step forward, his gaze fixed on Izuku. You think I'm a tyrant? His voice was low, but charged with undeniable power. But tell me, Izuku. He raised his hand, pointing at the screens that showed his empire, his people. What world is truly crueler? You were quirkless, and when you gained power, what did you do? Izuku breathed heavily, but couldn't answer. He knew what the answer was, nothing. Drakkon continued, his tone merciless. You didn't change anything, you didn't look back, you didn't help those who went through the same thing as you just became part of the same system that tried to crush you. Drakkon turned to the cameras, his message now directed to the entire world. Quirkless. The screens showed images of quirkless being rejected in the previous society, living in the shadows of a society that considered them inferior. Mutants. Those with non-human bodies were seen, discriminated against from birth for not fitting the image of a hero. Those whom society calls villains just because they don't fit in. The footage showed people with dangerous quirks, abilities that heroes dismissed as threats without giving them a chance to use for good. Drakkon closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, glowing with the power of the Morphin Grid. Know that there is a place for each of you in our empire. His voice was absolute. We don't reject them, we don't marginalize them, we accept them, a future where no one is discarded. The screens showed the people of the empire, the Sentinel Rangers, the citizens who had found purpose under his reign. A future where it doesn't matter how you were born, only what matters is what you choose to do with your life. Izuku felt his body paralyzed, he couldn't refute anything, his world never offered a real chance to the quirkless, he knew that, deep down, he had forgotten his own origin. Drakkon looked at him one last time, with a mixture of disappointment and triumph. I changed the world. He looked up at the cameras, making sure the message got across to everyone. What did you do? Silence fell over the city. The world no longer saw Drakkon as the villain, they were beginning to see him as the answer they never had. The end. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and now we will see you in the next video.